You shuffle along a mountain ledge. Just as twilight falls, the wind thin and cold, but strangely quiet for this altitude. Before you, a wall of stone rises, not stacked, not crumbled, not ruined, but locked together in a pattern so precise you could swear it was printed by some giant stone 3D printer. You slide your finger into one of the seams. It's tighter than a smartphone case. No mortar, no gaps, just raw rock, heavier than a passenger jet fitted by hands thousands of years ago. Or so they say. But you probably won't survive this journey, because what comes next is going to bend the rules a little. Not the laws of physics exactly, but the polite assumptions you've been trained to make about what ancient people could and couldn't do. This isn't mythology. These places are real. You can buy a flight to see them. They exist in the open, but they don't make sense. How did ancient builders, with supposedly no access to metal tools or writing or even wheels, construct structures that have survived earthquakes, glaciers, erosion, and centuries of curious scholars poking at them with polite confusion? There's a temple in Malta that hums like a tuning fork. A bowl in Bolivia with writing that looks like it came from Mesopotamia. Caves carved from granite with no inscriptions, no tool marks, and no explanation, just quiet. It's like someone built a world, then deliberately erased their name from the blueprints. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. It's like discovering a new kind of ancient map. Now turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. You're not going to hear about Atlantis or aliens or reptilian moonlords. Not unless they accidentally wander into the story. What you will hear are the weird details, the cracks in the official timeline, the artifacts no one wants to talk about at academic conferences because they don't fit neatly into the standard PowerPoint slide. Tonight we'll wander from the icy peaks of the Himalayas to the flooded cities of Greece, from the jungle-wrapped ruins of forgotten empires to steel-forged blades that shouldn't exist for another 800 years. You'll meet mysterious skull staircases that go nowhere and temples with doors no one can open anymore. And through it all, a quiet question will follow us like an echo. If history forgot to write down these wonders, what else did it miss? Step gently. Don't wake the stones. We're going back to the beginning, to the places where the past still whispers, to the walls that don't fall, to the ruins that refuse to explain themselves. You step into the thin, high air of the Andes, over 12,000 feet above sea level. Your boots crunch against the worn stones of an ancient path that zigzags along the spine of the mountain, and there it is Sacsayhuamán, a place whose name means satisfied falcon in Quechua, though you won't find any falcons here tonight. Just silent stone and a mystery, older than history books are willing to admit. The first thing you notice before the altitude hits your lungs is the wall. You tilt your head, then tilt it some more. These stones are not bricks. They are behemoths. Some rise taller than a man, others loom like buses tipped on end. One is the size of a house. They don't just sit next to each other. They interlock, slide together, tuck in tight with curves and corners that mimic puzzle pieces sculpted from mountain rock. You run your hand along the seam between two of them and feel nothing, no gap, no mortar, just two bodies of stone somehow molded to fit like flesh. And these aren't soft rocks. We're talking limestone and andesite. They don't chip easily. You don't get that kind of polish from a hammer and hope. Mainstream archaeologists tell us this was the work of the Inca Empire sometime in the 15th century under the rule of Emperor Pachacuti, the same one who built Machu Picchu. According to the official story, thousands of workers spent decades shaping and dragging these stones from a quarry miles away, by hand, with no wheels, no steel tools, no beasts of burden large enough to help. It's a beautiful theory, but you can't help wondering why here? Why this? Why this precision, this ambition, this refusal to cut corners, when corners were the only thing they didn't cut? Historians say the purpose of Sacsayhuamán was military, perhaps a fortress overlooking the city of Cusco. But then you notice something odd. The shape of the walls, zigzagging across 3 massive terraces, doesn't scream defense. It whispers something else. Lightning. That's one interpretation, a sacred symbol. Others say it mirrors the teeth of a jaguar, an animal deeply woven into Andean mythology. The entire city of Cusco, it's said, was laid out like a jaguar, and this place, this wall, was its head. You take a few more steps and spot a strange circular depression carved deep into the stone platform nearby. Was it a ceremonial plaza? An astronomical observatory? A quarry remnant? No one can agree. But it feels deliberate, too precise to be a fluke. There are also smooth channels etched into the bedrock, likely to direct water, though to what end, no one knows. For cleansing, for rituals, for art, the Inca. If it was, the Inca didn't just stack rocks here. They sculpted the landscape. They respected the terrain. They wrapped their buildings around the hills, carved stairs where natural shelves once stood. It was not just construction, it was collaboration. But here's where things get weirder. Local oral tradition says the Inca didn't build this place. They inherited it. According to the stories passed down through generations, these walls were already ancient when the Inca arrived. They were the work of a race of giants, or perhaps gods, or maybe just an older civilization that disappeared long before anyone thought to write anything down. If that's true, then we're not just talking about good craftsmanship, we're talking about lost knowledge. Techniques we don't have. A kind of precision engineering with no fingerprints left behind. Could they have softened stone? That's one theory. Legends speak of a special plant, extract some secret botanical formula that made rock malleable like clay. No one's reproduced it, of course, but the stories persist. Another theory flirts with science fiction, acoustic levitation. The idea that sound frequencies could have lifted these blocks into place. Vibrations, harmonics, ancient megastructures tuned to the Earth's natural frequency. It sounds ridiculous until you stand here at night and feel the silence pressing in like a frequency you can't quite hear. Modern engineers have tried to replicate these walls. They've failed. Not entirely, but enough to make you pause. Some of the stones in Sacsayhuamán are over 20 feet tall and weigh more than 120 tons heavier than a Boeing 757. And they're earthquake-proof. How through a technique called ashlar masonry, where each block is carved to interlock with its neighbors so tightly that when earthquakes hit, and they do often, the stones sway and settle back into place like they were never touched. Cusco's colonial buildings collapsed in past quakes. Sacsayhuamán still standing. Let that sink in. The Inca or someone before them created earthquake-resistant engineering in a seismically active region without mortar blueprints or bulldozers. Historians still debate whether the Inca truly built the entire site or just expanded upon older foundations. There's no definitive answer. The mystery deepens the more you look. You stand in the shadow of the tallest stone and try to imagine it in motion. Dragged across valleys, pushed up hillsides, maneuvered into place. Without wheels, without horses, without cranes. The closest quarry is several miles away through forest, river, and ravine. There are modern cranes that would struggle with this task. And even if you believe the official story that thousands of workers spent decades hauling and shaping each stone by sheer will and clever levers, it doesn't explain the artistry. The way the corners curve, the way the stones bow into each other, as if the builders were sculpting with soapstone, not limestone. You sit down on a nearby ledge and breathe in the cold. High above you, the stars begin to bloom. It's easy to see why this place was sacred. Whether it was built for war worship, weather, or wonder, Sacsayhuamán still holds something. A presence, a weight beyond stone. Maybe it was a fortress. Maybe it was a temple. Maybe it was both. Or maybe it was something we don't have a word for anymore. But tonight, it is simply quiet. And that wall, tight as ever, refuses to tell you how it was made. You're somewhere colder now, though not by temperature. This mystery is forged in fire and iron, but it still feels like it belongs in a museum of contradictions. In your hand is a sword, not just any sword. You tilt it toward the low sun and catch the glint of an inscription, Plus Afi Berat Plus. It looks out of place. Sharp, sleek, 1,000 years old, give or take, and still gleaming like it was forged last week. That's the thing with the Ulfberht swords, they shouldn't exist. Not the way they do. And certainly not when they were made. You picture a Viking thick beard leather armor boat rocking underfoot, and that gleaming sword in his hand. This isn't your average medieval hunk of metal. It bends without breaking. Cuts without chipping, flows with balance like a modern fencing foil, and strikes like a steel meteor. The problem is, it's made from crucible steel, and that technology didn't reach Europe for another 800 years. Go ahead and reread that. These swords are forged from a high carbon steel that was nearly flawless. No slag, no imperfections, no brittle weak points. At a time when most European blacksmiths were still hammering impure blobs of iron into short-lived tools, someone somewhere was producing steel as clean as what we'd expect from a 19th century foundry. Crucible steel requires extreme heat. You have to melt the iron, entirely purify it, then carefully introduce carbon at just the right level. It's not just metalwork. It's chemistry with consequences. Europe didn't get this process until the Industrial Revolution. But the Ulfberht swords, they were being swung in battle by Norsemen in the 800s. So how about 170 Ulfberht swords have been found across Europe from Scandinavia to Russia, from shipwrecks to burial sites? Some are the real deal, incredibly advanced crucible steel with high tensile strength and superior balance. Others are fakes, imposters, knockoffs. They carry the Ulfberht Plus name, but are forged from far inferior iron, like a medieval version of a bootleg iPhone. That raises another question. Was Ulfberht a person, a brand? A guild of elite blacksmiths guarding a lost secret? Or just a label that was so respected, everyone else wanted to copy it? What we do know is that the real Ulfberht swords aren't accidents. Someone had knowledge. Someone had access to materials, techniques, or trade routes that most of Europe didn't even know existed yet. There are clues if you squint hard enough at the historical maps. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were traders. They sailed east through rivers into modern-day Russia, where they encountered Arab traders, the Islamic caliphates, and maybe, just maybe, the secrets of Damascus and Indian Wootz steel. That kind of metalworking had existed in Persia and India for centuries. Crucible steel. Steel with the kind of carbon balance that lets a blade cut through iron and still come out smiling. Historians still debate whether the Vikings brought back ingots of that steel or learned how to make it. There's no hard proof. No Viking recipe book labeled how to liquefy iron. But there's a suspicious silence in the records where answers should be. Even if they got their hands on high-grade ingots, the next problem is even tougher forging it. Crucible steel requires temperatures higher than traditional Viking furnaces were thought to reach. So either they built better forges than we've ever found, or someone else made the swords for them. That's where the Franks come in. Some researchers believe that the true Ulfberht swords may have been made in the Frankish Empire, what is now parts of Germany and France, by elite swordsmiths working under strict royal regulation. These smiths may have secretly traded with the Vikings despite laws forbidding it. Or the swords were looted, stolen, or gifted through convoluted deals and battlefield spoils. Either way, the swords ended up in Viking hands and left archaeologists scratching theirs. Then one day, the real Ulfberht swords stop appearing. Just like that. The clean crucible steel vanishes from the archaeological record. Only the fakes remain flawed imitations with the same name stamped into the blade, but none of the brilliance in the metal. It's like someone pulled the plug on the whole operation. Did the secret die with a single master blacksmith? Did a trade route collapse? Was there a war? A betrayal? A quiet destruction of knowledge? We don't know. The silence that follows is louder than any forge. You look again at the blade in your hands. The inscription seems almost smug. Ulfberht Plus, surrounded by crosses like a blessing or a curse. The symmetry is sharp. The spacing is clean. You imagine the first warrior to hold it watching an opponent's blade snap under its strike. You imagine the last blacksmith who knew the process dousing his fire and walking away for the final time, the knowledge disappearing with the embers. Some metallurgists today have tried to recreate these swords using only the tools and knowledge available in the 9th century. The results? Frustrating. Most require modern equipment just to match the purity of the original blades. That means the people who made Ulfberht weren't just skilled, they were either wildly ahead of their time or not working alone. That's the real mystery, because the Ulfberht sword is proof. Proof that someone somewhere knew something they shouldn't have known, at least not yet. Whether it came from the east by ship or caravan, whether it was born in a hidden forge beside the Rhine, or whether it was whispered by the last ember of a civilization now forgotten, doesn't matter tonight. What matters is that it was real. A blade that shouldn't exist. A name etched in steel, carried across centuries, swung through myth, and buried in the earth, waiting for someone like you to find it again. Now, you're trudging through snow, real aching cold now. The air thins again, but this time, it's not just the altitude, it's the eeriness. You're standing at nearly 16,000 feet above sea level in the Indian Himalayas, and the ground beneath your boots crunches with something that isn't just ice, it's bone, hundreds of them. This is Roopkund Lake. Locals call it Skeleton Lake. And for once, the name isn't a metaphor. What looks like an ordinary glacial lake, just a shallow, still pool nestled among towering peaks, is in truth an open-air graveyard. Scattered along the frozen shoreline and just below the surface of the ice are the skeletal remains of over 300 people. You can see their empty eye sockets peeking out from beneath the water, like they've been waiting centuries for someone to finally ask what happened to them. But the thing is, no one knows. You kneel beside one half-buried skull, your breath fogging in the thin mountain air. It's cracked, not like decay. It's shattered at the crown. A perfect dent rounded almost as if someone had dropped a heavy sphere directly on top of the head. Then you look around. There are dozens more like it. Skulls with massive fractures on the tops nowhere else. No trauma to the face, no wounds to the spine. Just one devastating blow straight down from above. It wasn't battle. It wasn't disease. It wasn't an avalanche. So, what was it? For years, researchers guessed. Was it a migrating army, caught in a blizzard? A doomed pilgrimage? Maybe a group of locals killed in a freak storm? In the 1940s, a British forest ranger discovered the bones and notified authorities. At first, the theories were almost hopeful. Maybe they'd find some new history here, a lost troop from the British Raj, a long-lost invasion force. Something neat and chronological. They didn't, because the deeper they dug, the stranger it got. Carbon dating showed that these skeletons didn't all die at once. In fact, they came from at least two completely separate time periods, separated by nearly 1,000 years. One group dates back to the 9th century CE. The other as recent as the 1800s. And even more bizarre, these weren't people from the same background. DNA analysis revealed a mix of ethnicities, some South Asian, yes, but others with clear Mediterranean ancestry. Think Greece. Think Crete. Think far, far away from this high-altitude Himalayan lake. So let's pause for a second. You're telling me a group of Mediterranean travelers dressed in early clothes, no real weapons, not on a military expedition, ended up 16,000 feet up in the Himalayas near a lake filled with bones and died from blunt force trauma from above. And then, hundreds of years later, it happened again. Historians still debate whether these were pilgrimages, explorers, or something else entirely. But one theory, equal parts grim and plausible, has emerged as the frontrunner. And it comes ironically from folklore. The local people in the area tell a story that's been passed down for centuries. It goes like this. A powerful king was traveling through the mountains with his wife and a small entourage. They disrespected the mountain goddess, either by dancing, singing, or simply trespassing on sacred ground. In response, the goddess struck them down with hard round balls of ice like iron, which rained from the sky and crushed their skulls. Now normally you'd chalk that up to legend, something colorful to keep children from wandering too far during storms. But the forensic evidence matches. These people appear to have been killed by hailstones. Not your garden variety kind, the kind that crushes helmets. Enormous chunks of ice falling from a great height, striking with such force that they caved in the tops of skulls and killed people instantly without leaving any other marks. It sounds impossible, but it's not. A rare freak hailstorm in the high Himalayas, where the geography funnels wind and ice into a brutal downward spiral, could do it. Just once, maybe. But twice. 1,000 years apart. To groups with different ethnicities and different origins. That's the part no one can explain. And if you're thinking, well, maybe it was just a popular pilgrimage route, sure. Could have been. The presence of jewelry, wooden staffs, and some preserved textiles suggests that these weren't soldiers or peasants. They were pilgrims or nobles. People on a sacred journey. But if so, then why are no records of Rupkund found in ancient travelogues? Why doesn't it appear in sacred texts? Why aren't there ruins, temples, shelters, shrines nearby? Just the bones. And Rupkund isn't big. It's not a vast battlefield or a hidden valley. It's a glacial pond, quiet, inhospitable, nearly inaccessible for most of the year. You don't stumble across it. You have to want to be there. The bones, some broken, some still clutching wooden staffs, suggest that these people weren't buried here. They died here. Collapsed perhaps mid-stride, caught without warning. There are no weapons, no signs of a struggle, just a storm. A sky turned violent, and something else. The bodies don't all face the same direction. Some are scattered along the perimeter of the lake. Others are half submerged in the shallows, as though they crawled toward the water before dying. It's haunting. Like the mountain decided to tell its story in bones and left it there for us to decipher. If it happened once, you call it a tragedy. If it happened twice, you start whispering curse. Could Rupkund have been a ritual site, a testing ground, a sacred threshold between life and death, something so feared or so revered that pilgrims returned over centuries despite the danger? Or was it something simpler and sadder, a place where storms hide until the sky decides to let them loose? Modern science has brought us closer to an answer, but it hasn't closed the case. Every new expedition, every new bone, every new isotope sample only deepens the mystery. Because every time you think you understand what happened here, the lake melts just enough to show you another skull. Just waiting, watching, listening. For the next time, someone climbs too high. Now you descend. The snow fades, behind you replaced by heat sand and a river that used to be holy. You're in Egypt now, but not the part on postcards. This isn't the Sphinx or the pyramids. This is Abydos, older than those, and somehow even quieter. You're standing before the Osireion, a sight so strange that even Egyptologists sometimes blink when they talk about it. It doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't behave. It doesn't care what makes sense. The Osireion lies behind the Temple of Seti, when a pharaoh of the 13th century BCE. But unlike the ornate structure beside it with its hieroglyphs, colorful reliefs, and carved names, this place is bare, brutal, stone on stone. A trench dug deep into the ground, filled with water even in the driest seasons. At the bottom, massive granite blocks, stacked and fitted with such precision, they look wrong. They look out of place. They look older. And that's where the trouble begins. Because according to the official story, the Osirion was built by Seti first. And yet, nothing here bears his name. None of his iconography. None of the design flair you'd expect from a king obsessed with legacy. It's as if he found the site already ancient and simply constructed his own temple nearby, like someone moving into a new apartment and choosing not to redecorate the basement. These stones, the largest, weighing up to 100 tons, are not like the rest of ancient Egypt structures. They're megalithic, colossal, unadorned. They don't speak the architectural language of the New Kingdom. They speak silence. Like the walls at Sacsayhuamán, they lock together without mortar, without gaps, forming a rectangle sunk into the earth, half submerged by groundwater that refuses to recede. You climb down the narrow path. The temperature shifts. The air feels heavy. Still. The stone is pink Aswan granite, the same kind used at the pyramids, but here it's rougher, more direct. There's no attempt to impress, no ceiling to awe you. Just blocks. Towering blocks forming walls and pillars, many of which remain submerged year-round. And what's it all for? No one knows. Seriously, no one. Some call it a tomb, though no sarcophagus has ever been found. Others say it was ceremonial, a temple to Osiris god of the underworld and resurrection. That would make sense in theory. The water, the descent into darkness, it feels like metaphor made manifest. But then again, the inscriptions honoring Osiris are all from later visitors. The structure itself says nothing. It's mute. It doesn't offer clues. It just sits patient and wet and unresolved. So here's where the speculation blooms. Some researchers, especially the unorthodox ones, believe the Osirion predates dynastic Egypt altogether. Not just by a few centuries, but by thousands of years. They look at the wear on the stone and see erosion not just from water, but from rainfall. Heavy, sustained rainfall, the kind Egypt hasn't seen since the end of the last ice age. That would date the Osirion back to at least 10,000 BCE, a time when the Sahara was green, the Nile overflowed in chaotic seasonal floods, and humans were allegedly still nomadic hunter-gatherers. Could there have been a civilization back then? One capable of shaping, transporting, and placing 100-ton granite stones with such ease and purpose? Mainstream archaeology says no. Emphatically no. They argue the Osirion was simply an architectural throwback, a deliberate design choice by Setu I to evoke ancient times. But if that's true, why build it underground? Why skip the carvings, the art, the glory? Why construct something so deliberately unpharaonic in every possible way? And then there's the water. The Osirion is always wet. Always. Groundwater seeps in and never leaves. It's like the earth herself insists on keeping this place secret. You walk the perimeter and realize something. There's no evidence that this flooding is accidental. In fact, some think it was intentional, that the water was part of the experience, a sacred bath, a rebirth chamber, or maybe, just maybe, a power system. Yes, that's one of the more fringe theories, that the Osirion was once part of a larger network of energy-producing structures scattered across ancient Egypt, using water-granite resonance and geometry to conduct or harness natural frequencies. It sounds like science fiction until you stand here and feel the hum. Not a sound. Not quite. More like a pressure in your ears. A presence. Historians still debate whether the Osirion's location was a result of geological convenience or something more symbolic. It sits in the sacred city of Abydos, long associated with Osiris and rebirth. The area was a center of pilgrimage for thousands of years. Perhaps the Osirion was the oldest part of that tradition, the core from which all other temples grew outward. Or maybe it was forgotten, swallowed by time, buried until Seti's builders stumbled on it again and decided to frame it into their own mythology. There's an odd circular stone basin near the center surrounded by pillars. No one knows what it was for. Some say offerings. Others think it held sacred water. And then there are those who insist it once held something far more technical, like a magnetic core or a type of acoustic generator. All we have are guesses and one lingering feeling. It doesn't belong, not here, not in this era. The Osirion feels like a fossil of architecture, a leftover from something else entirely, like someone dropped it here from an earlier version of the world and left us to make up the rest. You press your hand against the granite. It's cool and damp. The stone doesn't whisper its secrets. It's endured too long to be chatty now. But you feel its weight, its stillness, its refusal to collapse. Whoever built this didn't do it for attention. They did it for something bigger, something deeper. And when you climb back up the stairs into the dusty heat of modern Egypt, the Osirion stays behind you, half in the water, half in another time. You're standing at the edge of the sea now, but the water doesn't feel like it's supposed to. There's something odd about the ripples, about the glint of the sun on the surface. Something almost deliberate. Welcome to the Setu, also known as Adam's Bridge. It stretches, or rather dots, across the shallow waters between southern India and Sri Lanka. A ragged line of limestone shoals and sandbanks just beneath the turquoise surface. To some, it's a natural formation. To others, it's the stuff of epic legend. And to you, staring down from a satellite image, or standing at the shoreline squinting out toward the horizon, it looks like someone tried to build a highway through the ocean and almost finished. The bridge is about 30 kilometers long, winding across the sea like a spine. It's visible from above, but when you stand close, the picture breaks up. Bits of sand coral shoals, nothing conclusive. But there's a tension here, like the earth is hiding blueprints beneath the tide. Now, if you grew up hearing Hindu epics, you already know the story. In the Ramayana, one of India's most sacred texts, the bridge was built by an army of monkeys. Yes, monkeys. Led by the devoted Hanuman, these celestial beings, half myth, half divine, constructed a path so that Lord Rama could cross the sea and rescue his wife Sita from the demon king Ravana, who had taken her to Lanka. It's a wild tale, full of magic monsters, loyalty, and war. But it has this one peculiar thing in common with satellite imagery: the bridge exists. That's the strange part. You read the Ramayana expecting metaphor. Then you look at a map and find the metaphor staring back at you. Not just a poetic line about a crossing, but a real visible structure exactly where the story said it would be. So now, the debate begins. Is this a case of myth, accidentally aligning with nature? A fluke of storytelling that happened to match a sandbar? Or did the story preserve a memory, some ancient human attempt to connect two land masses long before modern maps existed? Geologists say the bridge is a natural formation called a tombolo, a string of sand and sediment built up over millennia by wave action. Fair. Nature does strange things. But even many mainstream researchers agree this particular tombolo looks off. Too regular, too linear. Some sections are made of materials not native to the area. There are raised platforms, stone clusters, and curious uniformity beneath the sediment, suggesting possible man-made intervention. In 2007, satellite images published by NASA sparked international curiosity. The structure was unmistakable. A clear chain of shallow land, almost walkable in some places, just beneath the water. Suddenly, the ancient myth of the monkey-built bridge wasn't just metaphorical, it was geographical. The debate escalated quickly. Some declared it definitive proof of the events described in the Ramayana. Others rolled their eyes and filed it under pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where there are none. But then came the age tests. Carbon dating of materials found along parts of the formation suggested human activity around 7,000 years ago. Other studies cited dates closer to 3,500 years. And still others argued the land was above water as recently as 4,000 years ago, when sea levels were lower. That timing matters, because some believe the earliest oral versions of the Ramayana may predate its written form by thousands of years. Long enough, maybe, for memories of a walkable land bridge to fossilize into legend. Historians still debate whether the Ramayana is myth metaphor or an embellished record of prehistoric events. But the presence of ancient port cities on both shores suggests a history of long-distance trade and movement. Someone was living here, trading, building, crossing. Could they have tried to connect the islands permanently? It's not out of the question. In nearby regions, stone causeways and marine constructions from ancient times have been discovered, some submerged, some partially intact. In Dwarka, for instance, off the coast of Gujarat, divers have found ruins of what might be a sunken city, hinting that ancient maritime civilizations were more advanced than we give them credit for. So maybe Ram Setu wasn't the work of monkeys with divine powers. Maybe it was early engineers with stones and vision and a reason to get across the sea. Maybe the tale of Hanuman and Rama is a sacred retelling of a feat so audacious the only way to preserve it was to wrap it in divinity. Or maybe the truth is less solid. Maybe the bridge is nature's prank, a random accident of erosion and sediment that just happens to line up with a 2,000-year-old epic poem. That's possible too, but you stand here now, listening to the water lap against invisible stone, and you wonder. You squint toward Sri Lanka, and in the right light, you can almost trace the path yourself. It doesn't feel random. The bridge isn't perfect. It's broken, partial, as if whoever started it ran out of time, or faith, or tools. Or maybe they reached the other side and said, "We'll let the next civilization figure it out." You can't see the whole thing from ground level. That's the trick. Like many ancient mysteries, it only makes sense from above, from far away, from the eye of a god or a satellite. You imagine what it would feel like to walk it. Sand shifting beneath your feet, waves brushing your ankles. That surreal sense of being between worlds, between myth and geology, between faith and proof. No plaque explains it. No scientist agrees completely. But the bridge is there, just below the surface, waiting. Some call it Adam's Bridge, linking the Garden of Eden to the world beyond. Others call it Ram Setu, a monument to love, loyalty, and divine purpose. You don't need to choose. Sometimes a mystery stands strongest when it's made of both stone and story. And maybe that's what Ram Setu really is, a bridge between what was and what we still dream might have been. You crouch down in a mine in South Africa, brushing aside centuries of dust and sediment. At first glance, what you're looking at seems ordinary, just another rock pulled from the belly of the earth. But then the light catches something strange. It's a sphere, perfectly round, about the size of a plum, dark metallic, with 3 shallow grooves etched neatly around its equator, like a belt on a planet. It spins slightly when you set it down, as if balanced with uncanny precision. You blink, because this isn't a sculpture. It wasn't carved. It was found, pulled out of Precambrian rock formations, estimated to be around 3 billion years old. Welcome to the riddle of the Klerksdorp spheres, a collection of strange grooved metallic orbs that shouldn't exist, at least not in their current form, and certainly not in the geological context where they were discovered. The spheres were unearthed by miners near Ottosdal, South Africa, during routine operations in pyrophyllite deposits. That rock, soft pale and formed from compacted volcanic ash, is dated to between 2.8 and 3 billion years ago. Long before dinosaurs, long before trees, long before humans. Heck, long before multicellular life. Yet embedded within it were these perfectly shaped, geometrically patterned metallic spheres. Some were found in clusters, others alone. Dozens have been cataloged over the years. Most are small, ranging from a few millimeters to a few centimeters in diameter. But it's not their size that puzzles scientists. It's their design. 3 precise grooves, equidistantly spaced, circling the middle of many of these spheres. Not randomly, not naturally, not in a way that geology typically accounts for. And the material A mix of hematite and pyrite, iron-rich minerals, yes, but unusually pure and uniformly distributed. So here's the question that won't go away. How did these things form? The conventional explanation is that they're concretion's natural formations created over millennia as minerals accumulate around a nucleus. It's a real geological process. Concretions can take on unusual shapes, like spheres, disks, even twisted tubes. They often form in sedimentary rock. And yes, they can sometimes develop surface markings, but those grooves, that symmetry, it's not so easy to handwave, especially when some of the spheres, according to early accounts, seem to rotate on their axes inside sealed display cases. Perfect balance, delicate weight distribution, like they were machined. The museum in Klerksdorp once displayed several of these objects behind glass, accompanied by a label noting that the balance is so fine it exceeds the limit of technology of the NASA laboratory. A bold claim, and one that was later walked back under scrutiny. But the aura of mystery stuck, because even if you accept the concretion theory, it doesn't explain why this particular deposit seems to contain so many spheres with such consistent patterns. Nor does it explain the cultural legends that sprang up around them. Local miners spoke of the spheres with reverence. Some believed they were artifacts from a forgotten race. Others claimed they held special energies, that they were markers, messages, seeds. It's not hard to see why the theories ran wild. Ancient aliens, time travelers, lost civilizations that predate known history by millions, yes, millions of years. They all show up in books, podcasts, and conspiratorial YouTube deep dives, not because the evidence is airtight, but because the mystery is so hard to kill. Historians still debate whether the grooves were formed through natural sedimentary layering or post-depositional pressure. Some geologists argue that the internal structure of the spheres shows consistent mineral growth, not machining. Others point to outlier spheres made of unknown alloys, or those with internal cavities that hum faintly when shaken. No consensus, no clarity. And here's the twist that makes your spine twitch just a little. The grooves on some spheres are aligned so precisely that if scaled up, they resemble gyroscopic rings, like parts of a mechanical device. Nothing inside, of course. No gears, no batteries. But the resemblance is eerie. As if the Earth briefly tried to build something and then changed its mind. You might be thinking, okay, but couldn't people have placed the spheres into the soft rock later? After all, it's pyrophyllite weaker than soapstone. Fair question. But the spheres were found embedded deep within untouched strata, under layers that had to be cut through just to reach them. In some cases, there were no visible seams, no signs of tampering. Just a sphere in solid rock, surrounded by billions of years of geological sleep. So what are they? Nature's mistake? A fluke of mineral math? Or the leftovers of something older than our entire concept of history? There's no clear pattern, no inscriptions, no known duplicates outside this specific region, but the grooves keep appearing. Again and again. Like someone once had a template. You pick up one of the spheres. It's heavier than it looks. Cold metallic. Your fingers follow the grooves. Smooth. Consistent. No roughness. No randomness. Whatever made this be, It Earth time or something else. Didn't rush. The sphere doesn't glow. It doesn't hum. But it does something weirder. It lingers. In your palm. In your thoughts. It makes you question what the timeline of human activity is really based on. Because if an object like this had been found in a recent tomb, we'd call it a marvel, a sacred artifact, a sign of lost craftsmanship. But because it's 3 billion years too old, we call it a geological curiosity and move on. You place it back down gently. The air in the mind feels still again. But your mind is spinning just like that sphere once did silently behind museum glass, waiting for someone to ask the wrong question, or maybe finally the right one. Now you're deep in a limestone cave in southwestern China, and everything about the space feels slightly off. The walls are curved in odd ways. The ceiling is low, but the bones scattered around your feet aren't exactly small. They aren't what you'd expect from modern humans either. This is Red Deer Cave, and the people who once lived or perhaps died here are a scientific contradiction bundled into flesh and bone. Their remains were first discovered in 1989, and for years they were cataloged with little fanfare. But in 2008, when anthropologists looked closer, jaws dropped. And not just the fossilized ones. These weren't ordinary Homo sapiens. Not quite. They were something else. You kneel next to one of the skull fragments. It's thicker than yours. The brow ridge is pronounced almost primitive. The face is flat and broad. The chin is weak or absent. The molars are massive. But here's the kicker. The skull is only about 14,000 years old. That shouldn't be possible. By that time, the Neanderthals had been gone for 25,000 years. Homo erectus extinct. Denisovan's ghosts in a Siberian cave. The world, according to the tidy evolutionary timeline, belonged to us modern humans. Civilization was just beginning to stir. Art agriculture and the awkward first dances of written language were all on the horizon. But the Red Deer Cave people, they didn't get the memo. They seemed to be a holdover, a relict population of archaic humans who somehow survived long after their cousins had vanished. Or maybe they were something entirely new, a hybrid species born of interbreeding and isolation, evolving on their own evolutionary detour in a pocket of southern China. They had traits from earlier species like Homo erectus, or possibly even something older, but they also used tools. They likely cooked their food, and they hunted large game, including, you guessed it, red deer, whose bones litter the site alongside theirs. That's where the name comes from. But the most haunting thing about them is this: they were recent. When you think of ancient humans with thick skulls and primitive jaws, you imagine something deep in the Pleistocene. You don't imagine them walking the earth while humans were painting in caves and planting seeds in the Fertile Crescent. That temporal overlap changes everything. Because if a population of non-modern humans survived in isolation until as recently as 12,000 years ago, it begs the question, how many other groups disappeared without a trace? How many others lived just long enough to leave behind a few bones but not a name? Some researchers have even speculated that legends of wild men or forest people in Asia could be lingering cultural memories of encounters with the Red Deer Cave population. Not yet myth, not quite memory, just enough to spark stories about people who were like us, but not. Historians still debate whether the Red Deer Cave people were a distinct species, a hybrid, or just a strange branch of Homo sapiens who evolved differently due to isolation. Genetic testing might have helped solve the mystery, but there was a catch. The bones were poorly preserved. No DNA could be extracted from them at the time of discovery. It's like the past left a footprint, but took its signature with it. And here's where it gets stranger. The site isn't alone. Nearby other caves have turned up similarly odd fossils, fragments of jawbones, molars, and skulls, with features that don't line up neatly with the human family tree. These scattered bones suggest that southern China may have been a last refuge for multiple human lineages who weren't quite Homo sapiens. Why here? The region is mountainous, forested, rich in resources, but hard to reach. It's exactly the kind of place where a relict species could survive undisturbed, hidden, slowly adapting, holding on just a little longer. Imagine it as pyramids were being dreamed in the distance, as people in Mesopotamia began tracking stars and scribbling symbols into clay. These others, brow-heavy and thick-jawed, were roasting deer over a fire in a cave. Not primitive, just parallel. And when they finally vanished, how quietly it must have happened. No war, no sudden extinction, just a fading. A few bones left behind in a cave. A question mark where a chapter of human history should be. You step deeper into the chamber. Your flashlight flickers along a crumbling ridge, and you see it another fragment. A piece of pelvis wide and strong, possibly female, possibly maternal. You wonder, did she raise children here? Did she know stories? Did she look at the moon and feel what you feel? And then there's the academic side of your brain whispering, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But it's too late. Because what's more human than wondering about the human in others? The Red Deer Cave. People may have had a culture. They may have buried their dead. They may have passed down knowledge through stories, through mimicry, through memory. They may have seen us, Homo sapiens, as the intruders, the strange ones, and then slowly they were gone, erased not by cataclysm, but by absorption or obscurity. Maybe they interbred. Maybe they were hunted. Maybe they just couldn't keep up with the speed of a changing world. But for a brief flicker in time, they coexisted with us. You pick up a shard of antler near the fire pit. It's been sharpened, polished, a tool. Not flashy, but practical, efficient, just like ours. It's funny. We spend so much time looking for extraterrestrial life for something other, when the truth is, we've been sharing this planet with others the whole time. And sometimes their bones lie just a few inches below the dirt. Red Deer Cave doesn't offer easy answers. It offers evidence, suggestion, a new question carved into stone and sealed in the quiet of a mountainside. Were we ever really alone? Or have we simply forgotten how crowded the world once was? Now, you're in Scotland, in a quiet glen, just outside Glasgow, where the ground has a way of tugging at your ankles, as if trying to draw you into the past. Beneath your feet lies something large, massive even, but you'd never know it unless someone told you where to look. You step past the trees, brush away the undergrowth, and there it is, a great slab of rock, 43 feet wide, partially buried in the earth, like the back of some ancient sleeping beast. This is the Cochno stone, one of the most intricately carved prehistoric artifacts in all of Europe, and almost no one's ever heard of it. Your fingers trace the shallow grooves on the stone's surface, concentric circles, spirals, starbursts, and strange symbols that look like they belong more on the control panel of a spaceship than in a Bronze Age field. There are over 90 carved symbols on this single slab, most of them in the style known as cup and ring marks, an abstract form of rock art found all over the British Isles and parts of Europe, yet still largely undeciphered. It's beautiful and baffling. Some of the grooves are connected by long, meandering lines. Others are isolated like constellations without a sky. There are cup-like depressions, small hollows that dot the surface like pinpricks. Were they filled with oil, with pigment, with water to reflect the moonlight? We don't know. The Cochno stone was first documented in 1887 by a reverend named James Harvey, and for a brief moment in the early 20th century, it became a local curiosity. Archaeologists came, photographs were taken, rubbings were made, and then it was buried, covered up in 1965 by officials who feared the site would be vandalized. That's right. One of the largest and most complex prehistoric rock carvings in the UK was reburied to protect it from humans. For decades, it slumbered beneath the earth, unseen and unstudied. A secret whispered only in dusty archives and the occasional footnote. Then in 2015, it was partially uncovered for new research. And what they found was even more stunning than expected, because the Cochno stone doesn't just have carvings, it has layers of them. Some symbols appear to be superimposed over others, as if different generations of artists or shamans or priests had returned to the stone over centuries or millennia, adding new marks, reinterpreting old ones. It wasn't a one-time engraving, it was a living document, an ancient canvas that evolved with time. But what does it mean? Historians still debate whether the stone served an astronomical purpose. Some believe the symbols map the stars, possibly charting solstices or equinoxes. Others argue the marks are territorial, denoting sacred land or tribal boundaries. A few suggest a ceremonial role, a place for ritual sacrifice or divination. And then there are the dreamers, the ones who say the stone is a map of the universe, a prehistoric attempt to mirror the cosmos, that each spiral is a star system, each groove a journey. Theories that would sound absurd if they didn't echo so closely the oral traditions of ancient peoples all over the world. Because here's the thing, similar carvings, cup and ring mark spirals, concentric circles appear everywhere. In Ireland, in Spain, in Armenia, in South America, even in the American Southwest. Cultures that never met, never traded, never shared language, all carving the same shapes into stone. Why? It's one of the great unsolved puzzles of archaeology. The patterns are too consistent to be coincidence, too abstract to be purely decorative. Some researchers believe they represent altered states of consciousness, visions seen during trances, dreams, or the effects of natural hallucinogens. The shapes do resemble the kinds of visuals reported in such states: spirals, tunnels, radiating lines. Were these carvings a way to record visions, to speak with gods, to chart inner journeys rather than outer ones? Or maybe they were all of the above: spiritual, practical, symbolic. And here's another twist on the Cochno stone. Modern graffiti sits side by side with the ancient symbols. Names scratched in the 1960s, boot prints, even a faint outline of a shoe. At first it feels like an insult, a desecration. But then you look again and realize it's part of the story now. The Cochno stone is layered with time, not just in rock, but in memory. You lie back on the grass beside it, eyes tracing the path of a groove that winds like a river across the slab. It's hypnotic, soothing. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need to. It just is. And maybe that's the lesson here. We keep demanding answers, purposes, functions. We want to know. But sometimes the act of making is the meaning. Maybe the people who carved these shapes weren't trying to send a message across millennia. Maybe they were just trying to feel something, to mark the earth with something lasting, something beautiful, something human. One spiral becomes two. Two circles overlap. A groove curls around a cup mark, and your eyes follow it like a child tracing a maze. It leads nowhere, or everywhere. Like a thought you forgot you had. Like a song without lyrics. Somewhere nearby, another stone slab still waits beneath the dirt. Still hidden, still silent. The Cochno stone is spoken, not in words, but in the language of spirals. You're standing at the edge of an ancient civilization, but it doesn't feel like it. There are no towering pyramids, no ornate temples, no colossal statues of forgotten kings. Just scattered ruins, dusty artifacts, and a haunting silence where a language should be. This is the land of the Indus Valley civilization, and it's one of the greatest historical mysteries we still can't read. Literally, we have no idea what they were saying. You crouch beside a small rectangular seal just 2 inches across, made of steatite, a soft stone that turns almost creamy under the touch of ancient tools. Carved into its surface is a short line of symbols, maybe 5 or 6, sitting above the image of a unicorn. Not the fantasy kind with glitter and rainbows, but a mysterious one-horned creature that appears over and over in Indus iconography. There's something hypnotic about the design, sharp lines, odd shapes, loops and triangles, arranged with deliberate spacing. It looks like writing, but no one can read it, not one word. The Indus Valley script has been found on thousands of seals, amulets tools, and bits of pottery. It's always concise, no rambling paragraphs, no epic poems, no long royal decrees. Just tiny phrases, 3 to 7 symbols. Short, sharp, mysterious. And despite being over 4,000 years old, it remains undeciphered. Let that sink in. We've translated Egyptian hieroglyphs, cracked Linear B, and even begun decoding ancient Mayan glyphs, but not this. Not the script from one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. Because make no mistake, the Indus Valley people weren't primitive. They built sprawling cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, with grid-like streets, standardized weights, intricate drainage systems, and even multi-story homes with indoor plumbing. They had public baths, reservoirs, marketplaces. They traded with Mesopotamia. They made jewelry so fine it still glimmers today. Their craftsmanship was exceptional, but their words, gone, or maybe never shared. Historians still debate whether the Indus script was even a true language or just a symbolic notation system, like logos emblems or clan markers. Some argue it was used only for ritual or economic purposes, stamping goods for trademarking ownership. Others insist it was a fully developed written language that we just haven't cracked yet because, well, we don't have a Rosetta Stone. That's what made Egyptian hieroglyphs solvable, a single tablet that had the same message written in Greek Demotic and Egyptian. It was the key. We don't have that here. No bilingual inscriptions, no long texts, no clear repetition. And to make things worse, the seals are tiny. Not much room for complex grammar. Still, efforts continue. Scholars have used AI and machine learning to find patterns. They've mapped out symbol frequencies, identified probable syntax rules, and even tried comparing the script to ancient Dravidian languages. Promising leads, but nothing definitive. So you're left staring at that unicorn again, wondering what it was supposed to mean. Was it a clan symbol? a merchant's brand, a sacred beast, a mythological code. And what about the symbols? One looks like a sideways trident, another like a leaf, another like a fish, except it might be a tool, or a concept, or a number. It's like trying to read license plates from an alien planet, familiar enough to suggest meaning, but foreign enough to keep it forever just out of reach. There's frustration in the silence, but also beauty, because even without understanding a single word, you can feel the intelligence behind it, the consistency, the style, the effort, and maybe the mystery lingers because we're trying to read it with the wrong eyes. What if these weren't words meant for us? What if they were prayers, spells, inside jokes? What if the entire purpose was never to communicate across time, but simply to mark presence in that moment? I was here. I traded this. This is sacred. We don't know. But we do know this. When the Indus Valley civilization collapsed around 1900 BCE, it left no epic texts, no grand monuments, no conquering armies to write themselves into the future. It left artifacts, pottery, beads, bricks, and these little stamps whispering in a script no one alive can read. It's almost poetic, a civilization that rivaled Egypt and Mesopotamia in scale, sophistication, and urban planning. And yet we can't even say its name. Indus Valley is what we call it, based on the river. But what did they call themselves? Their gods, their kings, gone, vanished into the very silence that surrounds their script. And maybe that's the lesson, that civilizations aren't just remembered by what they build, but by what they leave behind that can be understood or misunderstood. You trace the edge of another seal still pressed into soft clay. This one shows a man seated in a yogic posture surrounded by animals. Bulls, elephants, maybe even tigers. Some call it Proto-Shiva, an early version of the Hindu deity. Others say it's a priest, or a shaman, or someone entirely unknown. The symbols above him are clear, deliberate, unmistakably written by a hand that knew what it was doing. Even if we don't, it's comforting in a strange way, because the Indus script reminds us that language is fragile, that knowledge can disappear, that entire worlds can be hidden inside 5 squiggles carved into stone, waiting for anyone to come along and finally listen. But tonight, under the warm haze of the desert moon, you sit beside the seal and let it speak in its own way, not in grammar, not in vocabulary, but in presence, proof that someone once looked at this same sky, held this same stone, and had something to say. And even if we never understand it, we still remember the voice. You walk across open grassland, now vast, flat, and empty. There's a hush here that doesn't quite feel natural. The wind sweeps across your ankles, but your eyes are drawn to the ground, not because of what's on it, but because of what was once beneath it. This is Archaeum, Russia's very own Stonehenge, hidden for millennia beneath the steppes until the late 20th century, when it was accidentally rediscovered during a survey for a dam project. Archaeologists moved in with shovels, notebooks, and cautious expectations. What they found: something so unexpected it felt like a historical ambush. Beneath the soil was a city, a full-planned concentric circle city. Built around 4,000 years ago, Archaeum appeared suddenly perfectly aligned to the stars, constructed with a kind of order and precision that modern urban planners would nod approvingly at. It wasn't big, maybe around 1,500 residents, but it was sophisticated. At its heart stood a circular plaza ringed by 2 concentric walls made from wood adobe and stone. These weren't haphazard huts thrown together by wandering tribes. These were engineered dwellings arranged methodically, complete with hearths, wells, ventilation systems, and drainage. The outer wall was both a defense mechanism and part of the city's structure, like a spinal cord woven through the buildings. But what's most astonishing isn't the layout, it's the alignment. The entire city is oriented with uncanny precision to astronomical events. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles. The central plaza seems to have functioned as a kind of observatory, with certain posts and gaps in the structure allowing sunlight to pass through and strike specific points during key times of the year. It's a calendar, a clock, a cosmic interface. And this isn't speculation. The alignments are measurable, repeatable, intentional. Who were these people? They're thought to have been part of the Sintashta culture, an Indo-European group that emerged on the Eurasian steppe during the Bronze Age. These were the chariot builders, the metallurgists. They likely spoke an early Indo-Iranian language and may have brought with them not just metallurgy and war horses, but cosmology and sacred geometry. But Archaeum seems different, more focused, more mysterious. There's a ritualistic feel to the layout, a sacred geometry. Historians still debate whether the city was built more for practical use or spiritual symbolism. Did the sun play a role in their rituals? Were the stars guiding their stories? Or was the alignment just a happy accident? Most scholars say no, it was no accident. Even stranger Archaeum wasn't alone. Across this region, called the Southern Urals, archaeologists began to uncover dozens of similar settlements, all designed in circular patterns, all dating back to around the same time. It was like finding a forgotten civilization. Not a single city, but a network, a culture with consistent principles, shared architecture, shared cosmology, and then silence. By around 1600 BCE, Archaeum and its sister sites were abandoned. No sign of war, no evidence of plague, just a slow fading. The wooden walls collapsed, the fires in the hearths went out, the people moved on, or disappeared. Why? Theories range from climate change to resource exhaustion, but no one knows for sure. The Sintashta people didn't leave behind writing. No myths, no genealogies carved in stone, just foundations ash and the whisper of celestial knowledge. And now, Archaeum sits under open sky, drawing pilgrims of a different kind. In modern Russia, the site has become something of a spiritual magnet, a New Age destination where mystics, neo-pagans, and the curious come to stand in the plaza and soak in the energies. Some claim the city radiates electromagnetic fields. Others insist it's a power node in the Earth's grid, a forgotten chakra of the planet. Scientifically provable? Not really. Fascinating? Absolutely. Because when a place persists in memory, even long after its purpose is forgotten, it's usually because it touched something deeper, a pattern, a rhythm, a truth we don't have words for anymore. You walk slowly around the edge of the outer wall, your steps tracing a path first worn by Bronze Age feet. You try to picture the people who lived here, not as shadows or ghosts, but as parents, hunters, stargazers. People who knew the stars better than we know our smartphones. People who built their homes with the cosmos in mind. Maybe they believed in cycles of time, of seasons, of life and death. Maybe the circles of Archaeum weren't just practical layouts, but maps of existence, round like the sun, like the moon, like the pupil of an eye staring up into the night. There are no towering monuments here, no temples of gold, just earth, wood, fire, and sky. And that might be why it's so powerful. Because Archaeum wasn't designed to conquer. It was designed to observe, to align, to resonate. A forgotten observatory built by forgotten people who understood something we no longer do. Historians still debate whether Archaeum's circular symmetry was mathematical brilliance or spiritual devotion. But either way it speaks. Quietly, persistently, like a whisper on the wind. You stop at the very center, where the plaza once hosted ceremonies or gatherings, or maybe just sunrises. The wind stirs the grass, and for a moment you hear it, not words, not drums, but alignment. Now, you're high in the mountains of Tibet. The air thin and strange, the silence even stranger. The cave around you is narrow, its stone walls slick with condensation. It doesn't feel like a sacred site or a shelter. It feels like a chamber deliberately sealed away from the world, like something was meant to be forgotten here. And maybe it was, because tucked into these caves were hundreds of small, round stone discs, flattened like dinner plates, with a hole through the center, and grooves spiraling outward from the hub, like the grooves on a vinyl record. But there's no music stored here. These are the Dropa stones, and their mystery is as deep and winding as the grooves etched into their surface. You kneel beside one of the discs. It's made from a hard granite-like material, not decorative, heavy, durable, practical even except for the fact that it's carved with a microscopic script. That's right within the spiraling groove barely visible to the naked eye, is what some say is writing an unknown language, written in characters so small and shallow, they require magnification just to see, and not just one or two symbols, hundreds. According to early reports, around 716 discs were found during a 1938 expedition led by Chinese archaeologist Chipu Te in the Bayanhar Mountains. He and his team were exploring a series of burial caves when they discovered the discs among dozens of tiny skeletons with oversized skulls, remains that were buried with care as if they belonged to a society, not just lost wanderers. The discs baffled everyone. They were cataloged, studied briefly, and then just like the Cochno stone, sealed away, reportedly stored in museums, only to vanish from public record in the decades that followed. Now let's hit pause here, because the Dropa stones are one of the most controversial finds in all of pseudo-archaeology. Depending on who you ask, they're either an elaborate hoax, a tragic mistranslation, or evidence of something so old and strange that no one knows how to talk about it seriously. But the story is unforgettable. According to translations that surfaced years later, allegedly by Chinese researcher Dr. Tsum Nui, the discs tell the tale of a spacecraft that crash-landed in the mountains some 12,000 years ago. The beings on board were small, with large heads and frail bodies. They called themselves the Dropa. Unable to leave, they took shelter in the caves where they lived and died, eventually intermingling with the local tribes. It sounds like science fiction, but it also sounds eerily close to many myths and legends told across Central Asia, stories of star beings, sky gods, and strange visitors who came from the clouds and vanished without a trace. Dr. Tsum's translation described the Dropa's struggle to adapt their sorrow at being stranded and their peaceful relationship with the locals. But the academic world rejected the findings outright. No official records of Tsum Nui exist. The institutions cited in the reports either denied involvement or remained silent. It all felt slippery. So were the Dropa stones ever real? Historians still debate whether the entire story was a fabrication born of Cold War rumor mills translated poorly, exaggerated intentionally, or simply swallowed by the fog of time. But some of the discs do seem to exist, scattered among obscure museum collections in China, labeled as ancient musical stones or ritual objects. And here's the thing: spinning disc-shaped objects with unknown writing carved in a spiral. That's not as unheard of as you'd think. Artifacts with radial inscriptions appear across the world, sometimes decorative, sometimes ritualistic. But the Drapa stones stand apart for their volume uniformity and their supposed narrative function, because if they really did carry stories, engraved stories, then we're talking about a prehistoric form of data storage. A library pressed into stone. And that's the unsettling part. You hold one in your hands. It's cold, unassuming, just a disc. But your mind can't help imagining, what if these grooves aren't just marks? What if they're encoding something, like a whisper from a world that wasn't meant to last? Skeptics say the stones are naturally occurring or were misidentified, grinding wheels used by early cultures. Others point to local tribes in the region, like the Dropa and Ham peoples, who have unusually small statures and distinct genetic markers. Coincidence, isolation, or a forgotten lineage. Some even claim that radio engineers once tested one of the stones and discovered it emitted a faint electromagnetic pulse, though no documentation survives to prove it. It's all too thin to hang certainty on. But it's thick enough to make you wonder. The cave around you remains silent. No murals, no bones, just the stone discs stacked in rows like records waiting for a player that doesn't exist anymore. Were they warnings? Apologies? Instructions for something long gone? Or was it just a myth that got out of hand? That's the mystery. Because whether the Dropa stones are evidence of an ancient crash, a lost civilization, or just a clever archaeological misunderstanding, they have carved out a space in our imagination. They speak to the part of us that wants to believe we're not the first. That maybe someone tried to tell us something long before we knew how to listen. You place the disc back into its groove, and just for a second, just a heartbeat, you think you hear something. Not a voice, but a frequency. Old, low, almost music. And then it's gone. Just stone. Just silence. Just another puzzle waiting in the dark. Now, you're in the coastal desert of Peru, but not where the tourists go. There are no llamas here, no pan flute music echoing through the markets. You're standing in a bone-dry graveyard, wind swirling around your ankles, staring at skulls that look wrong. They're human, mostly, but the proportions are off. This is Paracas, and the skulls unearthed here, elongated, heavy, and eerily smooth, have puzzled scientists, stirred conspiracy theories, and quietly defied simple explanation for decades. The first of them were discovered in the 1920s by Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello, sometimes called the father of Peruvian archaeology. He stumbled across a massive necropolis, over 300 skulls, buried in woven cloth bundles, some still cradled in the arms of mummified bodies. But these weren't just ancient corpses. They were head-shaped riddles. Most of the skulls were unnaturally long, elongated at the back, smooth and symmetrical, like stretched balloons made of bone. You might assume it's the result of cranial deformation, a practice found in many ancient cultures, where the skulls of infants were tightly bound with cloth or wood to achieve a desired shape as they grew. And yes, that accounts for some of them, but not all. Because the Paracas skulls don't just look different, they are different. Some are 25% larger in cranial volume than a typical human skull. Others are up to 60% heavier. The sutures, those jagged seams where the bones of the skull fuse together, are often missing or completely different from normal human anatomy. Let's say that again, the internal structure doesn't match what we expect. That's not something cranial binding can do. Deformation can change the shape, yes, but not the internal anatomy. It doesn't increase brain volume. It doesn't alter bone density. It doesn't erase sutures. So what happened here? Historians still debate whether the Paracas skulls represent a subspecies of human, a genetic mutation, or a lineage that we simply haven't identified yet. DNA tests have been attempted with conflicting results. Some labs reported mitochondrial DNA with markers that don't match any known Native American lineage. Others found contamination or inconclusive data. Was it a fluke of isolated breeding, a mutation passed through generations, or something even older, an echo of migration long before the accepted timelines? And then there's the other layer of mystery. They buried their dead with ceremony. You walk among the graves and notice that many of the skulls were laid to rest with delicate textiles, finely woven in patterns far more advanced than what was expected for the region and time period. The fabrics used dyes that had to be imported or synthesized reds so rich they still catch the desert light thousands of years later. These weren't outcasts. They weren't mutants in hiding. They were respected, maybe even revered. Were they a priest class? A ruling elite? The remnants of a much older civilization whose origins are now lost beneath shifting sands and silent bones. Some believe the Paracas people may have been connected to earlier, more mysterious cultures like the Corral, or even pre-Andean seafarers who arrived from across the Pacific. Their burial customs and genetics suggest they weren't entirely isolated, and yet their most famous features, those elongated skulls, don't appear in surrounding regions with the same intensity or frequency. This wasn't just a fad, it was something else. You lift one of the skulls from its resting cradle. The back slopes backward in a long, smooth arc, like the head was designed for something different. It doesn't feel alien, but it doesn't feel fully familiar either. And here's the strange part: they didn't hide it. The skulls weren't buried in secret chambers or hidden behind ceremonial walls. They were placed openly in communal graves, wrapped in colorful cloth heads, still crowned with tufts of red or dark brown hair, as if their physical form was something to be honored, not concealed. You might be thinking, maybe the elongated skulls are just symbolic. Maybe they represented wisdom power or divine connection. That's possible. In many ancient cultures, deforming the head was a status symbol, a way to elevate the individual literally and figuratively. Egyptian pharaohs, Mayan, nobles, even some Native American tribes practiced forms of cranial shaping. But again, those don't change the brain. The Paracas skulls might have. And if they did, if this wasn't just decoration, but the physical expression of a different kind of human altogether, then what does that say about the history of this land? Why are there no myths about them? No legends in local tradition describing people with different heads, larger minds, heavier bones? Did the knowledge vanish? Was it erased? Or did their story continue underground, beneath the desert, waiting for someone like Tello to come dig it back up? You move between burial bundles, the fabric rustling slightly in the dry breeze. One still has jewelry, small beads, carved from shell and stone. Another holds a bowl painted with symbols that have never been translated. Some of the skulls have holes drilled into them, evidence of early trepanation, possibly surgical. They were experimenting, or healing, or preparing the body for something sacred. And here you are, 1,000 years later, tiptoeing among the dead, trying to understand why these people altered their very biology or inherited it in a way no textbook can fully explain. The wind shifts. A gust lifts a corner of cloth and reveals another skull. This one's different. Shorter, rounder, more like yours. Maybe they weren't all elongated. Maybe this was a mixed society, two groups living side by side, or interbreeding, or gradually merging. One remembered by textbooks, the other remembered by the shape of its bones. You place the cloth back down. The desert goes quiet again. Historians still debate whether the Paracas skulls are an evolutionary anomaly, a cultural extreme, or something entirely separate from modern human lineage. But what they all agree on is this: we don't have the full story. Not yet. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it's okay for some mysteries to remain half buried, to keep one eye socket open beneath the sand, to remind us that the past wasn't just strange, it was stranger than we want it to be. And if you ever feel like the world is too well mapped, too explained, too predictable, remember the Paracas skulls, quietly lying in rows, heads still high, even in death. The desert heat is different now, drier, harsher. The land ahead is cracked and golden, but if you look closely, you'll see pieces of a lost world poking through the dust. A broken pottery shard here, a carved stone there. This is Jiroft, a forgotten cradle of civilization buried in the Halil River Valley of southeastern Iran. And for a long time, no one even knew it was there. It wasn't discovered the way most ancient cities are, through careful excavation or hints in ancient texts. Jiroft announced itself by accident after a massive flood in 2001 swept through the region and unearthed hundreds of artifacts, many of which immediately disappeared into the black market. Dealers were suddenly offering up exotic carved chlorite vessels with strange iconography, and the academic world blinked in confusion. These pieces didn't look like anything we knew from Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Indus Valley. They looked older, stranger, independent, so researchers rushed in. And what they found beneath the dust and flood debris was staggering: temples, citadels, cemeteries, tablets. A sprawling urban center dating back to at least 2500 BCE, possibly earlier, built by a civilization that had its own artistic style, its own writing system, and apparently its own mythology. Yet somehow, it had been completely forgotten by time. You crouch beside one of the signature artifacts, a dark green chlorite cup carved with reliefs. You trace the outline of what appears to be a winged creature, possibly a god or something older than gods. Beneath that, a man with upraised arms wearing a crown. The symbols don't match anything you know, but the storytelling is unmistakable. This was a culture that thought in images, that carved its cosmology into stone vessels as if hoping the gods might drink from them someday. Some of the items depict scorpion men serpents and other hybrid beings, creatures that would feel right at home in the Sumerian epics of Gilgamesh or the Zoroastrian texts of ancient Persia. But these carvings predate those by centuries, maybe more. That's the part that stings. Because if Jiroft is as old as it seems, and if the symbols on these artifacts are truly a written script, not just decorative patterns, then this changes everything we thought we knew about the timeline of writing. Historians still debate whether the Jiroft script is a genuine language or a symbolic system. The characters are blocky, geometric, and repetitive, etched into tablets that have never been fully deciphered. Some scholars believe they may represent an independent writing tradition, one that evolved separately from Sumerian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs. And if that's true, then writing wasn't invented once. It was invented multiple times. That's the kind of idea that keeps archaeologists up at night. Giroft challenges the notion that Mesopotamia was the singular cradle of civilization in the ancient Near East. Instead, it suggests a parallel evolution, an advanced culture flourishing in what is now Iran, trading with neighbors, developing its own iconography, and leaving behind a legacy no one bothered to write down. Or maybe they did, and we just haven't learned to read it yet. You run your hand along the dry earth, brushing away sand from what looks like a stone panel. There's a carving of a temple, a ziggurat possibly framed by two lions. Not warlike, protective, sacred. No texts accompany it, no known kings, no epics. Just the imagery, just the message. We were here. We built this. We believed in something. And yet, Giroft remains mostly absent from textbooks. Why? Part of it is timing. The discovery came during a politically tense period. Part of it is skepticism. Without more excavated context, many scholars hesitate to call it a civilization on par with Ur or Memphis. And part of it is just plain hesitation, because accepting Giroft means rewriting the map of ancient history. It means the world was more interconnected, more creative, and more complex than our neatly labeled timelines like to admit. It means a civilization can rise, flourish, and vanish without fanfare, without pyramids, without conquerors to sing their praises. Just a few tablets, a few carvings, and a handful of archaeologists scrambling to catch up before the desert reclaims everything. You walk farther into the ruins. The sun casts sharp shadows through the collapsed mud brick walls. In the distance, a farmer plows a field that once may have been part of a palace. His ox pulls the blade through soil layered with memory. He's seen the artifacts, surely. Maybe he's even sold one. But he doesn't talk about Giroft like it's a mystery. To him, it's just the past. To you, it's a missing chapter. The strange thing is how silent the site feels. There's no chaos here, no signs of violent collapse, just a fading. As if the people of Giroft left quietly, or perhaps adapted, moved, and became someone else entirely. Their identity swallowed not by war, but by time. And still, they left clues. There are altars, stone tools, irrigation systems, jewelry, everything you'd expect from a highly developed culture. Except for one thing: names. We don't know the name of a single ruler, priest, or scribe. Not one. Their history, if it was ever written down, is locked in symbols no one understands. But maybe that's okay, because even without translation, the artifacts speak. Not in grammar, but in gesture. Not in narrative, but in presence. Giroft says, we were wise. We built. We believed. And that's enough for now. You stand at the edge of the river, dry now, but once a lifeline for this forgotten world. You imagine the children who once played here, the merchants who once shouted across the stalls, the priests who once whispered to stone gods under a starry sky. They're gone, but their fingerprints are still warm. You're far from the riverbanks of Giroft, now in a colder place, Europe. But the mystery in your hands still pulses with that same ancient weight. This time, it's not a stone vessel or a skull. It's a slab of clay, a tablet, but it's not Sumerian. It's not Babylonian. or Hittite, or even Linear A. This one was found in Tartaria, in modern-day Romania, and it's got just enough symbols carved into its damp gray surface to break history a little. You're holding one of the Tartaria tablets, and it's older than it should be, much older. Found in 1961 by archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa, the tablets came from a Neolithic site associated with the Vinča culture, a prehistoric European society that flourished in the Balkans around 5300 BCE. The site yielded figurines, pottery, and domestic tools, but it was these 3 tiny tablets that lit a firestorm because on them were symbols, intentional, deliberate, and arranged. Writing, proto-writing, random scratches. Historians still debate whether these marks represent a language or just early religious symbols. But here's what shook the archaeological world. The Tartaria tablets may be older than the earliest known Sumerian cuneiform by nearly 1,000 years. That changes the narrative, doesn't it? Because we're taught that writing was born in Mesopotamia, that civilization itself began between the Tigris and Euphrates, where humans first learned to shape symbols into sentences. But what if it didn't? What if farmers in southeastern Europe were already experimenting with written communication, completely separate from the scribes of Uruk? The symbols on the tablets bear striking resemblance to those found in other Vinča sites across Serbia, Bulgaria, and Hungary. Repetitive zigzags, cross-hatchings, abstract figures etched into pottery bone and now clay tablets. Many of these symbols predate known Mesopotamian writing systems. And there are hundreds of examples, not just one fluke, a pattern. You turn the tablet over in your hand. One has a hole drilled through it, possibly to be worn around the neck like an amulet. Another bears an image of what looks like a tree or maybe a branching river. The third carries a series of crisscrossing lines as orderly and intentional as anything found in ancient archives. But what were they saying? We don't know. We may never know. The symbols don't map easily onto any known language. Some scholars think they represent proto-writing, a system of symbols used to represent ideas, not phonetic sounds. Others think it might have been a priestly code, a sacred language passed only among spiritual elites. Still others believe the tablets weren't meant to be read in a linear sense at all, but rather interpreted ritually, a kind of visual prayer. And then, of course, there are the more fringe theories that the Vinča culture was part of a forgotten European cradle of civilization, that these people had developed complex social structures, spiritual systems, and yes, even writing long before the rest of Europe caught on, that their language was buried, not lost, deliberately silenced by waves of Indo-European migration. You can see why it's controversial. The mainstream academic response to the tablets is cautious, maybe even a little dismissive. Without a large corpus of text, without context, and without a way to decode it, most archaeologists hesitate to call the Tartaria tablets writing. To do so would be to rearrange the timeline of literacy. To admit that Europe, long thought of as a student in the school of Mesopotamian brilliance, may have written its own script in the shadows of deep prehistory. And yet, here they are, 3 tiny tablets, silent, still, asking big questions. You crouch beside the excavation site, looking out across the Danube plains. The air smells like tilled earth. Somewhere nearby, cows low. Wind rustles through wheat fields that have fed generations. It's hard to imagine that underneath this soil, layers of forgotten culture sleep in the dark, undisturbed, unsung. But they do. The Vinča people weren't nomads. They built houses with multiple rooms. They made tools, jewelry, and figurines with detailed craftsmanship. They developed symbolic art, traded across long distances, and buried their dead with care. And maybe, just maybe, they wrote, not like us, not on scrolls or parchment, but in clay, in symbols, in loops and lines and sacred geometry. Maybe they wrote not to record, but to remember. Because writing didn't start with shopping lists and taxes. It started with ritual. The first written marks in many cultures weren't economic, they were spiritual. Names of gods, incantations, tomb blessings, ceremonial dedications. It's possible that the Tartaria tablets were never meant to be read aloud, but instead activated like sacred keys in a forgotten language of the earth. You sit quietly now, the tablet warm from your touch. No translation arrives, no flash of understanding, but you feel it, that tremor of curiosity that always follows the discovery of something too old to explain and too deliberate to ignore. We want writing to be linear, predictable, born in one place, passed like a baton from civilization to civilization. But maybe it wasn't like that at all. Maybe it bubbled up in multiple places at once, like fireflies blinking across a field unaware of one another, yet lighting the same dark sky. The Tartaria tablets don't tell us what happened, but they hint. They say we knew something. We carved it. We left it for someone. That someone might be you. You're standing in the highlands of Laos now, where the air is thick and the grass rustles like whispers. Spread across a plateau in this quiet landscape are enormous jars, giant stone jars, hundreds of them scattered across the hills, like forgotten cups left behind by giants after a very strange party. This is the Plain of Jars, one of Southeast Asia's most confounding archaeological mysteries. Thousands of these megalithic jars are scattered across more than 90 sites in central Laos. The largest among them weighs over 15 tons, stands more than 10 feet tall, and was carved out of solid sandstone. Others are shorter, chunkier, or more eroded, but all share that same uncanny presence, as if they belong to a vanished people whose purpose has long since faded into the dust. You approach one. It's mottled with lichen, cracked at the rim but still upright. You peer inside. Empty, as they all are. No inscriptions, no decoration, no answers. Just jars. And no one can agree why they're here. Theories have come and gone like the monsoon rains. Some archaeologists believe the jars were part of burial practices, giant urns used to store human remains during the funeral process. Others suggest they were used to collect rainwater for travelers. There's even a theory that they stored fermented rice wine brewed and shared during ceremonies. But here's the catch. No one has ever found an inscription explaining their use. No written records. No oral traditions with clear answers. And the civilization that built them, it's vanished. Completely. We don't even have a name for them. Excavations have turned up human remains, tools, beads, and ceramics nearby, but often outside the jars, not inside. In some places, carved stone discs have been found, which may have been lids, though not all fit the jars neatly. Were the lids symbolic, decorative, functional? We just don't know. Some of the jars are made from granite, others from sandstone, limestone, or even conglomerate. Each one would have required weeks of carving with primitive tools, and then the labor to transport it, sometimes miles from quarry to site. That's not something you do without serious motivation, and they didn't just dump the jars randomly. The placement is careful. They're often clustered in specific patterns, arranged on hillsides or open plateaus with wide views. Some are placed near what may have once been trade routes, river crossings, or ceremonial centers. Still, they keep their secret. The local legends offer more intrigue than clarity. One popular myth says the jars were made by a race of giants who used them to brew and store rice beer after a victorious battle. Another tale claims a king named Kunchung commissioned them to celebrate his conquests. Whether rooted in truth or spun from imagination, these stories speak to the aura of scale and mystery that surrounds the jars. You step into the middle of one of the larger clusters. The jars rise around you like tombstones, but more enigmatic, less final. Their hollow mouths seem to listen, to wait. Then there's the modern complication UXO, unexploded ordnance. During the Vietnam War, this region of Laos became one of the most heavily bombed places on Earth. American planes dropped millions of bombs here, many of which didn't detonate. Even today, unexploded cluster munitions remain buried in the soil, making excavation dangerous and limiting research. Some jar sites are completely off limits. Others have only been partially cleared. It's a painful irony, an ancient mystery made inaccessible by modern warfare. Still, progress has been made. In 2016, UNESCO designated the Plain of Jars as a World Heritage Site, bringing new attention and protection to the area. Teams of archaeologists, both local and international, continue to study the sites, trying to piece together the identity of the jar makers. Carbon dating of surrounding materials places the use of the jars somewhere between 500 BCE and 500 CE, but some believe the tradition could be even older. Artifacts suggest contact with other regional cultures, possibly even trade or shared spiritual practices. Yet no one else in the region made jars like these. That's the odd part. The design is unique. No smaller prototypes have been found. No transitional forms. It's as if the tradition appeared fully formed and then vanished. Historians still debate whether the jars were a localized custom or the fragment of a larger, now lost culture that once spread across Southeast Asia. Some jars were later repurposed by different groups, which only adds to the confusion. But the original purpose still unclear. You kneel beside one particularly tall jar, its rim weathered like the edge of an old drinking glass. You imagine someone, thousands of years ago, placing something inside it. A body, a relic, a memory. Did they speak to the jars? Leave offerings. Cover them with cloth or leaves or songs. The silence gives you no answers. Just presence. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the jars weren't just containers. Maybe they were threshold spaces meant to hold transition, transformation, something between the living and the dead. Not just vessels for bone or rain, but for spirit, for ritual, for returning. Or maybe they were storage jars. It's always possible. But they don't feel practical. They feel intentional, as if their very existence was meant to provoke awe, to mark the land with something lasting, to stand against time hollow and unyielding. You step back and look across the field. In the golden light, the jars cast long shadows, each one its own echo. They may never speak, but they still hold space. And in that space, mystery lives on. You're on the western coast of France now, just inland from the Atlantic wind, where the grass grows low and the land undulates in quiet waves. The road is narrow, the trees thin out, and suddenly, without warning, you're standing face to face with thousands of standing stones rising in neat, endless rows, like a gray army frozen mid-step. This is Karnak, one of the largest megalithic complexes in the world, and also one of the most mysterious. Stretching over 4 miles, the Karnak stones number in the thousands, over $3,000 surviving today, though some experts estimate there may have been twice that many. Tall, short, square, narrow. Some are as high as a 2-story building. Others barely peek over the grass, but all are stone. All are deliberate, and none of them speak. You walk between them, boots crunching over ancient soil, trying to find a pattern in the madness. And then you see it. Not chaos, but alignment. The stones are arranged in rows, parallel, intentional, and eerily precise. In some places, they stretch out like the ranks of an ancient parade. In others, they gather in clusters, stone circles, chambered tombs, dolmens that once served as gateways to whatever waited on the other side. But why? Why so many? Why here? There are theories. Some believe Karnak was a giant astronomical observatory laid out to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars over the course of the year. The alignments do suggest solar and lunar patterns, solstice lines, equinox paths, even possible lunar standstill markers. But if it was a calendar, it was a calendar so large you could walk through it, a calendar you could get lost in. Others suggest it was a ritual center, a sacred landscape where the living communed with the dead, where processions took place under sacred skies. The stones may have marked burial paths or ceremonial routes like silent sentinels, witnessing generations of grief and prayer. And then there are more practical guesses, territorial markers, status symbols, navigation aids for travelers crossing the misty Breton landscape. But let's be honest, none of these explanations truly satisfy. Because what kind of society moves thousands of stones, many weighing several tons, without beasts of burden, without wheels, and without written records? What kind of people spend years, decades, perhaps carving and dragging stones, only to leave them in lines that no one now can decipher? You stop at the edge of the Menic alignment, where the stones stand tallest. You place your hand on one, feeling the chill of time in the lichen-streaked surface. The stone doesn't move, doesn't vibrate, doesn't hum, but it feels alive. Or rather, it feels witnessed. Like you're not just touching a stone, but being seen by it. That's the thing about Karnak. It doesn't feel like a construction site. It feels like a memory. Local legend, predictably, has a more poetic explanation. One tale says the stones are a Roman legion turned to stone by a wizard. Another claims they are the fossilized remains of giants or the footprints of gods. Children growing up nearby are still warned not to wander through the stones after sunset, lest they vanish. There's no central temple, no towering statue, no single structure at Karnak that tells you what it all meant. It's not a pyramid. It's not Stonehenge. It's bigger, but quieter. Historians still debate whether the Karnak stones were built over generations by different communities, or whether a single cultural impulse drove the entire project. Some estimate that construction began as early as 4500 BCE, possibly even earlier. That makes it older than the Great Pyramid, older than Stonehenge, and older than writing. That's right. Karnak is older than history itself, and yet we know almost nothing about the people who built it. Not their name, not their language, not their myths, just these stones. And in some ways, maybe that's fitting, because stone doesn't decay. It doesn't rot or burn or fade. It endures. And Karnak endures more than most, despite storms, despite centuries of farmers reusing stones for houses and churches, despite modern roads cutting across the fields, despite war, and still, thousands remain anchored in soil, whispering of a time when silence was sacred and memory wasn't written in books, but carved into the earth itself. Some researchers point to the geology of the area. The stones were likely quarried locally, shaped with hammerstones and dragged using sledge ropes and raw muscle. But how they achieved such consistent spacing and orientation without surveying tools or mathematical theory is still unclear. What kind of culture develops that kind of coordination without writing? And why devote so much energy to something that doesn't produce food, protect a border, or house a king? Unless it did all of those things and more. You sit down on one of the smaller stones near the edge of the field. In the distance, the rows stretch on, fading into mist and shadow. Birds flit between them. The wind stirs the grass, and then the realization hits you. This is a landscape-sized riddle, a puzzle that was never meant to be solved, only walked through, experienced, felt. Maybe the builders of Karnak weren't trying to encode a message for us. Maybe they were building a space to connect with something else, something beyond language, beyond death, beyond explanation. The sun begins to lower. The stones cast long shadows, each one like a sundial, marking a moment lost to time. You stand. You walk between them again, slower this time. And for just a moment, the rows seem to shift. Not physically, but in your mind. They become a procession, a ritual, a memory passed down not through ink, but through alignment, through presence. Not written history, but embodied memory. And that's what Karnak is. Not a book, a feeling, etched in stone. Now, you're in southern Iraq, in the dust-heavy ruins of a place that was once bustling with life. It's quiet here now, just the wind moving over broken bricks, the occasional lizard darting into shadow. But in a forgotten corner of this ancient world, archaeologists uncovered something that still makes people's eyebrows arch involuntarily. A small statue, humanoid, and yet not. Meet the Al-Ubaid statues, a series of strange figurines unearthed from the ruins of Tel al-Ubaid, dating back more than 7,000 years. That's older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than nearly every civilization we usually think of when we imagine the ancient world. But what's truly bizarre isn't the age of these statues. It's how they look. You kneel beside a display case, and there it is, no more than a foot tall, carved in a hunched posture, its face unmistakably reptilian. Slitted eyes, elongated skull, scaled texture on the skin, and sometimes a baby. Yes. Some of these statues show lizard-like humanoids holding infants in their arms, cradling them, nursing them, comforting them. It's the kind of imagery that, if found in a science fiction comic book, would seem appropriately dramatic. But this isn't pulp fiction. This is archaeology, and no one can quite explain it. The figurines were discovered in the early 20th century by Sir Leonard Woolley during excavations that also brought us the famed royal tombs of Ur. Most were found in temples or ceremonial contexts, which adds another layer of strangeness. These weren't toys. They were sacred. The Ubaid culture that produced them predates writing, predates ziggurats, and predates even the mythology of gods like Enki and Inanna. Yet here they are presenting what appears to be a race of reptilian beings treated with reverence. So what were they? Historians still debate whether the statues represent actual beings, spiritual deities, symbolic traits, or simply aesthetic style. Maybe the reptilian features were meant to evoke fertility, like snakes shedding skin, and symbolizing rebirth. Maybe they were spiritual messengers, guardians, or demons. Or maybe, just maybe, they were something else entirely. Skeptics point out that ancient cultures often anthropomorphized animals. Egyptian gods had falcon heads, jackal heads, crocodile heads. The Maya had jaguar gods. Why not snake people? Fair point. But the tone of the Ulfberht statues is different. These aren't monstrous. They're maternal, gentle, intimate. You look closer. One figure wears a headpiece. Another has a belt or sash. They're not naked animals, they're clothed. Some stand, some kneel. One even seems to wear a kind of helmet. And these weren't the only examples. Across Mesopotamia and the Near East, scattered carvings and reliefs occasionally hint at serpent beings, slithering figures on temple walls. Snakes emerging from trees in myth, hybrid creatures standing beside kings. Coincidence, cultural metaphor, or whispers of something older. The Ubaid culture left behind no written texts, no myths, just tools, homes, pottery, and these statues. Which means all we can do is interpret. And that's where things get murky, because the statues have predictably become fodder for ancient alien theories. Some suggest these lizard-like beings were actual extraterrestrial visitors, worshipped as gods by primitive humans. The theory paints the Ulfberht figurines as early sketches of real encounters recorded not in language, but in shape. Others see them as evidence of a lost civilization, one that predated Mesopotamia and was later mythologized into stories of serpent gods, underground dwellers, or the Nagas of Hindu tradition, powerful, divine snake beings said to live in hidden realms. Too far-fetched. Maybe, maybe not. Because here's the part that's hard to explain. Away the global recurrence of reptilian imagery. From the feathered serpent in Mesoamerica to the dragon kings in China, the serpent mound in Ohio, to the rainbow serpent in Aboriginal Australia, snakes aren't just feared. They're worshipped. They're sacred. And they keep showing up in stories about creation, destruction, and divine knowledge. Maybe it's because snakes were dangerous and ancient people respected danger. Or maybe it's something deeper, some collective memory that slithers under our myths. You step away from the statue, its empty eyes still watching, not menacingly, just persistently. The ruins of Tel Al-Abyad crumble around you, but the figure remains. Small, still, silent, its message unclear, its presence undeniable. Historians still debate whether the statues were simple religious icons, fertility symbols, or even toys. But one thing is certain, they don't fit neatly into the story we've been told about early Mesopotamia. They're too weird, too unique, too deliberate, and yet no one wrote down why. That's the curse of prehistory mystery without explanation. Clues without context. Art without annotation. You imagine the artisan who carved this figure 7,000 years ago, scraping detail into its face with a piece of flint, then wrapping it in linen for placement in a temple. Did they believe in it? Fear it? Hope it would bring rain? Fertility protection? Or did they know something we don't? You may never find out. But the statue remains. Reptilian, maternal, unblinking, a reminder that long before gods had names and myths had authors, there were figures like this shaped in stone, placed with care, and left to watch us try to remember. You're in Bolivia now, but this isn't the jungle. You're standing on a vast dry plateau, where the mountains have pulled apart just enough to make a high desert, the wind slicing sideways and the sky too big for comfort. From a bird's eye view, it looks like a forgotten chalkboard etched with giant lines stretching for miles across the empty landscape. But this isn't chalk, and it certainly isn't random. These are the Sacsayhuamán lines, and they go on forever. Straight lines, thousands of them, carved into the crust of the Altiplano Bolivia's high plateau. Not looping or zigzagging, straight. Some run for 10 miles without deviation, unbending over hills, through valleys, across rocks and scrub and soil. Altogether, the network covers an area of around 700 square miles, and it's been estimated that there may be more than 16,000 individual lines carved into the ground, and no one knows exactly why. From ground level, it's hard to see the scale. You might miss them entirely, just subtle grooves, 2 to 3 feet wide, an inch deep, running in paths that don't seem to lead anywhere. But from the air, that's when the madness becomes visible. The whole plateau is cross-hatched like a blueprint, long unwavering lines crossing in geometrical patterns, radiating from hills converging near villages, fading into the vastness. But the mystery isn't just their size. It's how they were made and why. You crouch down and run your fingers through the dirt. The lines were made by scraping away the oxidized top layer of soil, revealing the lighter-colored ground beneath. There's no evidence of tools, just endless perfect alignment, as if they were drawn with a laser pointer and a ruler held by a mountain. So how did people with no aerial perspective manage this? That's the first question archaeologists ask. Historians still debate whether the Sacsayhuamán lines were created by the Aymara people or earlier pre-Columbian cultures. The Aymara, one of the oldest indigenous groups in South America, have long inhabited the Andes and high plains. But there are no records, oral or written, explaining how these lines came to be. Some suggest they were created over centuries, passed down through generations, as ritual paths walked repeatedly until the lines were etched into the ground. If true, that would require a staggering level of communal coordination, decades or even centuries of collective movement, keeping the lines aligned and continuous. Others propose they were part of a religious or ceremonial landscape. The lines often converge at sacred mountain shrines and burial towers called chulpas. It's possible they were pilgrimage routes used for sacred journeys, processions of believers walking from one holy site to another, wearing grooves into the earth itself. But even then, why so many? Why so straight? You look out across the plateau, and the lines stretch toward the horizon like arrows frozen mid-flight. They cross one another, but never curve, never stray. It's as if they were drawn to honor geometry itself. Some researchers have compared the Sacsayhuamán lines to the Nazca lines further west in Peru, but the Nazca figures are mostly symbolic spiders, monkeys, birds each large enough to be seen from above. The Sacsayhuamán lines are more abstract, pure paths, lines without pictures, routes without obvious purpose, and they dwarf Nazca in scale. So here come the more speculative theories. Some say the lines were ley lines channels of earth energy mapped by an ancient intuitive science now forgotten. Others suggest they were celestial maps aligned with the stars or solstices. A few even argue that the network functioned as a sort of terrestrial computer encoding some kind of ritual or cosmological knowledge, but no inscriptions remain. No carvings, no monuments to explain the pattern, just line after line after line. One of the more compelling possibilities is that the Sacsayhuamán lines acted like a memory palace, a vast landscape where rituals were encoded through movement. Walking certain paths at specific times of the year might have activated oral traditions, ancestral stories, or religious ceremonies. The lines would have been mnemonic devices, guiding memory and myth across the land. But if that's true, the memory has long since been forgotten. And yet, something persists. Modern. Aymara. People still treat the mountains here as sacred. They still walk the highlands during festivals, often retracing old routes that pass along the ancient lines. When asked about them, some elders shrug. Others smile and say, they've always been here, which is another mystery in itself. You stand still now, letting the silence settle. There are no trees here, no cities, just wind and stone and sky. The lines beneath your boots stretch off in all directions, so straight it makes you feel crooked. Whoever made them didn't do it for fame. There's no writing, no temple, no icon, just the discipline of alignment. And maybe that's the message, that sometimes meaning isn't carved into language or bound in books. Sometimes it's walked into the ground over and over until the earth remembers what we forget. You start walking a line yourself, slowly, carefully, step by step. It feels like nothing at first. Then something strange happens. You feel focused, like your body understands something your brain doesn't. There's no destination, no ending, just motion, just connection. You're walking a groove worn by thousands before you, stretching across centuries with no map and no certainty. And it's perfect. A path carved not toward a city or a king, but toward stillness. And in that stillness, maybe the answers still live. You're in Texas now. That's right, good old USA. Pickup trucks, tumbleweeds, and big skies. But beneath one of those skies, in the rolling grasslands, near the town of London, not the famous one, but a sleepy rural town in central Texas, a man once cracked open a rock and found a piece of history so strange it still makes scientists squint and shuffle in their chairs. Inside that rock was a hammer, a literal hammerhead, complete with part of its wooden handle encased in solid stone. This is the London hammer, and it has no business being where it was found. You picture the scene. It's 1936. A couple hiking along a creek bed finds a lump of rock with a piece of wood sticking out. Curious, they take it home. Years later, they break it open, and inside is a metal hammerhead fused into the stone like a bug trapped in amber. Only it wasn't sap. It was Ordovician rock, according to some early assessments. That would make it around 400 million years old. So what's a human-made tool doing in rock from a time when fish didn't even have jaws yet? You hold the hammer. Now it's simple, unadorned. A short handle, a head of iron, and a small patch of shell-like mineral where the iron meets the stone. It doesn't look like much, but it's the context that makes it extraordinary. Because if the hammer really was embedded in rock, that's hundreds of millions of years old, that either means one of two things. Our understanding of geological layering and dating is completely wrong. Someone or something was building tools before dinosaurs existed. Both options feel uncomfortable. Let's slow down. Skeptics have pointed out that the stone surrounding the hammer could be a concretion, a kind of rapid cementing process that happens around objects buried in mineral-rich sediment. These can form in decades or centuries, not millions of years. It's possible the hammer was dropped into a crevice and then became encased as water and minerals hardened around it. That would be a nice, tidy answer. Except the hammerhead is made of 96% pure iron, with no modern casting marks and very little corrosion. The purity is surprising more refined than 19th century frontier tools typically were, and certainly odd for something supposedly that old. Then there's the wooden handle partially fossilized. That takes time more than just a few decades, though the exact rate depends on environmental conditions. And yet here, it is ironwood stone and mystery all wrapped up together in one tidy contradiction. Historians still debate whether the London hammer is a hoax, a misidentification, or a genuine artifact misplaced in time. But like so many objects on the fringe of archaeology, it exists in a kind of academic limbo, too weird to accept, too real to ignore. And then you ask the deeper question, what if this wasn't a fluke? What if there were more? There are other so-called out-of-place artifacts like this, metal spheres in ancient rock layers, spark plug-looking fossils, iron nails found in geodes, even carved figurines dug out of coal seams. Most are dismissed, often rightly, as misidentifications, misunderstandings, or deliberate frauds. But the London hammer, it's still around. Not a rumor, not a photo, an object you can touch. It's been on display in several private museums, especially ones with a creationist tilt, which has further muddied the scientific conversation. Because once an artifact becomes symbolic of something larger, whether religious or conspiratorial, it stops being just a tool. It becomes a challenge. You turn the hammer over in your hands. It feels ordinary, heavy, real. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because what if time is more layered than we think? What if our tidy categories, Paleolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age, missed something? A rise, a fall, a reset. What if there were tool makers long before the people we know as first? The hammer doesn't speak. It has no inscription, no maker's mark, just mass and presence. And that might be enough. Some geologists argue the hammer is probably 19th century, encased by strange concretion. Others say the stone looks too old, and if that's the case, then we're not just talking about bad dating. We're talking about forbidden history, the kind that lives not in textbooks, but in closets and drawers, in artifact cabinets no one wants to open. The kind of history that doesn't just rewrite a chapter, it rewrites the entire table of contents. You glance out at the landscape. Dry grass, scrub trees, fences rusting along the edges of cattle fields. It doesn't look ancient. It looks familiar, and maybe that's the point. Because what's more familiar than a hammer? A tool, a symbol. The first thing a child mimics when pretending to build. But what if it wasn't our first tool? What if it was someone else's? The London hammer sits quietly. It doesn't scream its truth. It just waits. And whether it's 100 years old or 100 million, it still does what it was meant to do. It makes us question. Now you're on an island. Not the kind with palm trees and drinks with umbrellas, but Malta, ancient sun-blasted and carved from limestone. You walk through winding alleys older than cities where stone seems to sweat history. And below you, far below, is one of the most unsettling, awe-inspiring underground constructions ever discovered. It's called the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni, and stepping inside feels less like entering a tomb and more like descending into someone else's dream. You take a deep breath before going in. Not because the space is tight, though it is, but because the air itself feels thick, still, like it hasn't moved in 1,000 years. Which might be true. The Hypogeum was first discovered in 1902, purely by accident, when construction workers stumbled into it while digging for a new housing development. What they found made archaeologists blink, then gasp. A subterranean temple carved entirely by hand into limestone, dating back over 5,000 years, contemporaneous with the oldest pyramids and maybe even older. The word hypogeum literally means underground in Greek. But this isn't just a cave or a crypt. It's a multi-level architectural marvel, complete with chambers, passageways, altars, and acoustic anomalies that still can't be fully explained. And it's all built in the dark. There are no natural light sources inside the hypogeum. Every surface, every stairwell, every arched corridor had to be envisioned and carved by people working by torchlight or by sheer memory. And yet, it flows room to level to level with a kind of organic intelligence that makes modern blueprints look clumsy. You descend into the first level. It's modest, smooth walls, rounded niches. But then you go deeper into the second level, about 10 meters below the surface. And here, things get weird. The rooms open up. The carvings become more elaborate, spiral motifs, honeycomb patterns, and what looks like false doorways carved into the walls leading nowhere. Were they symbolic spiritual portals, or just design choices? And then you find it, the oracle room. This chamber is small, barely large enough to stretch out in. But when you stand in the center and speak, something incredible happens. Your voice resonates, bouncing through the stone in low, rumbling echoes that seem to come from everywhere at once. Not just louder, deeper, like a second voice beneath your own, mirroring and amplifying your words. Researchers have tested this effect with instruments, voice analysis, and frequency equipment. The room is tuned to amplify 111 Hz, a frequency known to affect the human brain. Some say it promotes meditative states, even triggering mild hallucinations. It's been associated with sacred chanting and trance-like conditions in various religious practices. Was this room built for sound healing, for ritual chanting, for altering consciousness? Historians still debate whether the resonance was intentional or a happy accident. But here's the thing: you feel it. In your bones, in your chest, like the room itself is breathing with you. And the people who built it, we don't even know their name. They left behind no writing, no kings, no gods carved into walls, just bones, thousands of them. Excavations uncovered the remains of more than 7,000 individuals, many placed with care, along with tools, beads, and small figurines. Most were likely buried here during the temple's use, though it's unclear whether the hypogeum began as a tomb or evolved into one. Some believe it was once a temple of initiation, a place where shamans, priests, or community leaders descended into the earth to commune with the divine, undergo transformation, or perform sacred rituals. Others think it may have been a womb-like space representing rebirth, where the dead were returned to the earth in preparation for the next world. Whatever it wasn't ordinary. There's something else too. The architecture of the hypogeum mirrors that of Malta's above-ground temples like Hagar-Kim and Menajdra, with their rounded apses, altars, and central passageways. This suggests a continuity of design, a kind of symbolic language etched into both sunlight and shadow, above and below, as above, so below. And yet the hypogeum goes deeper. The third level, often inaccessible to the public, descends another several meters down. It's largely unadorned, simple stark. Some believe this was a storage space. Others think it may have been part of the original burial complex. But there's an unsettling feel to it. Quiet, claustrophobic, like the end of something. You climb back to the second level, and suddenly you notice something else: the way the chambers connect. The way voices carry, not randomly, but strategically. If you stand in one room and speak, someone in another chamber can hear it perfectly. It's like the whole structure was designed as a giant instrument. But for what kind of music? You walk past one of the alcoves where a statue once stood, now missing. Only fragments remain. But some believe it may have been related to the so-called sleeping lady, a figurine found nearby showing a corpulent woman lying on her side, seemingly at peace. Some interpret her as a goddess of fertility, others as a priestess in trance. Either way, she's a rare glimpse of the people who once walked these halls. Were they matriarchal, shamanic, peaceful? We don't know. Their culture eventually vanished around 2500 BCE, leaving behind only stone mystery and a few tantalizing figurines, and the hypogeum. It was sealed up, lost, hidden for nearly 4,000 years until someone's shovel punched a hole in its ceiling. You stand now in the oracle room again. The light is dim, the air cool and heavy. You whisper a word, any word. It bounces back to you, doubled, deeper, alive, and suddenly you're not in a tomb. You're in a machine, a temple, a message built not in ink, but in vibration. The builders may be gone, but the echo remains. You're standing at the edge of Lake Titicaca now, in the Bolivian highlands once again. But this time, your eyes are drawn not to the water, but to a curious artifact locked behind museum glass. It's roughly the size of a cereal bowl, made of stone, smooth and oddly shaped. But what stops you isn't the shape, it's the writing. Welcome to the mystery of the Fuente Magna Bowl. They call it the Rosetta Stone of the Americas, though that's probably too generous or not generous enough. Because if what some researchers claim is true, this single object may rewrite the entire early history of the Americas. You lean closer. The bowl is carved from brown stone, polished to a dull sheen. The outside bears typical Andean imagery, nothing too surprising there. But inside the bowl, etched along the interior rim, is a series of symbols. Not native Andean, not anything you'd expect to find near Lake Titicaca. No, the symbols look suspiciously like Sumerian cuneiform. And that's where the fun begins. Discovered in the 1950s, near the village of Chua, not far from Tiahuanaco, the bowl was reportedly unearthed by a Bolivian farmer and later handed over to the local authorities. For years, it sat collecting dust until scholars finally took a good look and did a collective double-take. Because those interior inscriptions, though, weathered, bear a remarkable resemblance to ancient Mesopotamian writing, specifically Proto-Sumerian pictographs, the kind used over 5,000 years ago in the early stages of cuneiform. Now pause a second. Sumer, Mesopotamia, Iraq, thousands of miles across oceans and continents, and yet here in the Andes, on a bowl with local Andean iconography, someone etched a message in a language that, if verified, should not be here. Not even close. Historians still debate whether the bowl is a hoax, a misidentification, or a genuine relic pointing to some form of prehistoric transoceanic contact. Traditional archaeology balks at the idea. The academic consensus is that Sumerians never reached the Americas and that any resemblance is just coincidental. But then you look again. The lines are too neat, too deliberate. Some symbols repeat. Some match what's found on tablets in Uruk. There's structure here, syntax, meaning. In the early 2000s, researchers like Dr. Clyde Winters claimed to have partially translated the bowl's message suggesting it referred to a ceremonial act involving a Sumerian fertility goddess. If true, this would be the first written record in the New World, predating any Mesoamerican scripts by thousands of years. And that raises questions. Did the Sumerians have boats that could cross the Atlantic? Could they have reached South America through island hopping and ocean currents? On the surface, it sounds ridiculous. But here's the strange part. Oceanographers have shown that ancient trade winds and currents could, in theory, carry a small vessel from Africa's west coast to the Americas accidentally or intentionally. And there are myths scattered across ancient cultures about wise men and gods arriving by sea. Coincidence? Maybe. But the bull sits there quietly daring you to look again. You trace the carvings with your eyes. A tree, a fish, a hand. It's not decorative, it's language. Meant to be read, meant to survive. Skeptics argue that the Fuente Magna bull could be a modern forgery created in the early 20th century to stir up interest or attract fame. But no one has ever proved it. The artifact doesn't match modern carving techniques, and there's no clear record of tampering. Plus, it was found before anyone outside academia would have had easy access to Sumerian symbol charts. And why carve it into a bowl with Andean motifs? Why mix cultures unless it was genuine, or unless someone knew something that's since been lost? Other researchers suggest that rather than a lone Sumerian voyage, the bowl might be evidence of a forgotten global seafaring culture, a kind of proto-civilization that predates our neatly labeled timelines. One that traveled, traded, and left behind linguistic fingerprints in places we're only just starting to notice. You walk the shores of Lake Titicaca and imagine a different past, one not constrained by modern maps. A world where the Andes and the Euphrates weren't opposites but cousins, where ancient sailors saw the stars the same way and followed them toward new lands, not for conquest, but for connection. That's the radical idea here, not invasion, not colonization, but contact. A forgotten whisper between worlds. There's supporting strangeness too. Ancient ruins near the lake, like Pumapunku, defy easy explanation with their precision-cut stones and impossible joinery. Myths from local Aymara and Quechua peoples speak of gods who came from the east by sea, bearing knowledge and strange language. Of course, none of this proves anything. It's circumstantial, suggestive, but that's what makes it compelling. The Fuente Magna bowl exists in that twilight zone between evidence and interpretation. It's not alone either. There's the Pocosia monolith found nearby, also featuring strange inscriptions, potentially in the same unknown script. Together, they form a pair of clues that keep drawing new eyes and fresh debate. Some call it pseudoscience. Others call it proof. You stand in front of the display case again. The bull stares back, unapologetic. It doesn't care what anyone believes. It isn't trying to convince you. It's just there, carved and quiet, a survivor of something we no longer understand. Maybe it's a hoax. Maybe it's a message. Or maybe it's just what it looks like, an impossible object too real to ignore, too strange to explain. And maybe that's what all the best mysteries are. You're in Kenya now, walking through the dry savanna under a sun that feels ancient. Not just old, but ancestral. The kind of sun that has seen everything. You pass scattered acacia trees and herds of goats, and then nestled into a remote ridge you see it. Not a ruin, not a tomb, but a collection of pillars rising from the earth like the teeth of forgotten gods. This is the Lothagam North Pillar Site, a Neolithic monument older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids built by people who left no names and no writings, just stones and bodies. The site was discovered near Lake Turkana, an area long known for hominin fossils and Stone Age artifacts. But this was something else. From the sky, Lothagam looks like a cosmic compass, a wide platform ringed by standing stones arranged around a central mound. The center of the mound, it turns out, is a communal cemetery where more than 580 individuals were carefully buried generation after generation. And they weren't just dumped into the earth. They were arranged, interred with care, accompanied by beads, jewelry, and ornaments made from stone ivory and ostrich eggshell. You kneel beside one of the outer pillars. It's not carved. It doesn't have inscriptions, but it points upright as if it's been standing there, waiting for someone like you to ask what it all meant. And what's even more astonishing, the society that built this site was nomadic. That's right. The Lothagam builders weren't kings. They weren't emperors. They weren't even farmers. They were pastoralists, cattle herders who moved with the seasons, tracking water and grazing land. People who weren't supposed to build monuments. People who weren't supposed to cooperate at large scales. And yet, they did. They hauled stones, weighing hundreds of pounds, from distant outcrops. They shaped and arranged them. They built a platform nearly 100 feet across, ringed it with pillars, and created an egalitarian graveyard that endured for centuries. No hierarchy, no elite tombs, just people, young and old men and women buried side by side, equal in death. Historians still debate what motivated this kind of collective effort. How did a nomadic culture, without cities, without temples, coordinate something so complex? Why pour time and labor into a structure they would have to leave again and again as they followed their herds? One theory is that the climate was changing. Around 5,000 years ago, the region began to shift from lush to arid. Rainfall became less predictable. Lake levels dropped. Life got harder. In response, these people may have built the monument not just as a cemetery, but as a symbol of unity. A fixed place in an unstable world. A reminder that even though they roamed, they still belonged to something shared. You walk around the edge of the burial mound. Small beads scatter across the surface, glinting in the sun. These were once sewn into clothing necklaces and belts. Some people were buried with hundreds of them. Others wore lip plugs made of ivory or stone symbols of identity, beauty, or status, depending on whom you ask. But again, there's no sign of kings, no tombs of the rich, just community. And that changes things, because most ancient monuments, especially large-scale ones, were built under centralized control. Pharaohs, emperors, priests with armies of laborers. That's the narrative we've come to expect, that complexity needs command. But Lothagam says otherwise. Here was a society with no written language, no apparent ruling class, and no permanent cities. And yet they built a structure that required planning, cooperation, and engineering not once, but sustained over hundreds of years. This wasn't a one-time event. This was a tradition, and it tells us something radical, that monumental architecture isn't just about power. It can also be about belonging, about anchoring memory in the land. Some researchers believe the site also had astronomical significance. The placement of the pillars may align with celestial events like solstices or lunar cycles. If so, then this was more than just a burial site. It was a ceremonial hub, a gathering place, a calendar carved into stone. You pause and sit near the central mound. The earth here is quiet, but not dead. You can imagine the ceremonies, drums, firelight, the smell of cattle in the distance. Families gathered, elders speaking, children listening. The idea that a mobile culture could build something so rooted, so enduring, forces us to rethink what civilization means. Not cities, not kings, not conquest, just community, memory, and meaning. The Lothagam pillar site was eventually abandoned as the climate grew even drier, and people moved farther in search of pasture. The traditions faded. The site fell silent, but the stones stayed, waiting, witnessing. And when archaeologists unearthed it thousands of years later, they didn't just find skeletons. They found a philosophy, a way of being. Because in a world where permanence is rare, and where the ground beneath your feet can change with the season, sometimes the only thing to do is build something that doesn't move, to carve your identity into rock, not for power, not for glory, but just so you're not forgotten. You're standing in Romania again. But this time, your feet are planted in the forest near the town of Aiud. There's a chill in the air, sharp metallic, the kind that settles in your teeth and makes you think twice about what's real and what isn't. Because what's buried here doesn't seem to follow any rules, not of time, not of science, not of logic. This is the home of the Aiud aluminum wedge, an object found beneath the soil, embedded in a layer of earth alongside what appeared to be the fossilized bones of prehistoric animals. Not mammoths, not anything recent. These were said to belong to creatures that roamed the earth over 10,000 years ago, and right there, nestled beside them, was a wedge-shaped object made of metal. Not iron, not bronze, but aluminum. You probably don't need a metallurgy degree to see why that's a problem. Aluminum wasn't isolated as a usable metal until the 1800s. Before that, it was locked inside bauxite and other ores almost impossible to extract without electricity or advanced chemical processing. In fact, during Napoleon's time, aluminum was considered more precious than gold. That's how rare and complicated it was to produce. So what was it doing in a sediment layer, possibly older than civilization itself? You crouch beside a replica of the object. It's not beautiful. It's functional. A dull gray wedge, roughly 8 inches long, slightly curved with ridges and pitting that suggest it once connected to something larger. Some have compared it to an airplane landing gear, a piece of machinery, or even part of a spacecraft. And yes, that's where the theories begin to spiral. When it was first discovered in 1973, the aluminum wedge was sent for analysis in several labs across Romania and abroad. Tests revealed it was composed of around 89% aluminum, with traces of copper, silicon, zinc, and other metals. That alone was shocking. But even stranger was the oxidation layer coating the artifact, suggesting it had been buried for thousands of years, long enough to form a crust of corrosion that doesn't appear on modern tools. So, naturally, questions began flying. Was this a piece of ancient, advanced technology, an artifact from a long-lost civilization like Atlantis or Lemuria? A remnant of extraterrestrial contact? Or was it something more mundane, just modern debris that somehow ended up where it shouldn't have? Historians still debate whether the wedge was part of construction equipment, like a tooth from an excavator bucket, or even a piece of a modern airplane that got buried and forgotten. But those explanations come with problems. For one, the area where the wedge was found wasn't known to have heavy machinery traffic in ancient times or even modern times at the depth the artifact was discovered. And the context: it was alongside ancient bones, not just stuck in loose topsoil. That's not where you expect to find 20th century metal, and the metallurgy itself doesn't match most industrial alloys used in Romania at the time. Then there's the shape. Engineers and aviation experts have weighed in. Some say the curvature and wear suggest high-speed contact like landing skids or external fixtures on fast-moving vehicles. Others think it could be part of an old hydraulic system, but none of them are comfortable with the age it implies, because aluminum simply shouldn't be there. You hold it in your hand now, a modern reproduction, smooth and cold. It doesn't radiate magic, it doesn't hum, but it feels wrong or right, depending on what you believe. Some theorists go all in. They suggest the Iud wedge is a piece of alien machinery left behind in prehistory, that it's part of a craft that crashed here long before humans walked upright. Or perhaps it's evidence of a forgotten epoch, a civilization that rose and fell before the Ice Age, leaving behind tools scattered in stone. You step away and look at the forest. Quiet, peaceful. Deer tracks in the mud. Birds chirping in the trees. Nothing here screams mystery, and yet the wedge remains. Official museums rarely display it. Its provenance has been questioned. Some of the original documentation has vanished. The artifact itself moved from lab to lab with few detailed records. Some claim this is because it's a hoax. Others think it's because it wasn't supposed to be found. Here's the part that keeps people coming back. It's real, not an internet myth, not a rumor. A real object that has been held, tested, and puzzled over for decades. Regardless of its origin, it has become a symbol of anomaly. A reminder that history is full of cracks and sometimes strange things fall through. You imagine an ancient engineer holding the original wedge, fastening it into a machine, tightening the bolts, preparing for flight or transport or something more exotic. You picture them checking the fit, watching as the aluminum glints in the sun. And then something happens. The tool breaks loose, buried, forgotten. Time swallows it. Thousands of years later, a worker with a shovel pulls it from the ground, blinks, and wonders if he's just broken open the past. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe someone dropped it in the last century. Maybe it really is a misidentified gear tooth or drill bit. Maybe it's nothing. But in the absence of certainty, it becomes something. A story. A wedge in the wall of what we think we know. And maybe that's all it ever needed to be. Now, you're flying over the Amazon. A sea of green rolls endlessly beneath you, dense jungle, stretching to every horizon, broken only by snaking rivers and wisps of mist that rise like breath from the earth. You'd think this was untouched wilderness, primal, untamed. But then you see them, circles, squares, lines, not in the trees, but under them, shapes, pressed into the land itself, slowly emerging as deforestation clears away the canopy. And suddenly, the story of the Amazon changes. Welcome to the world of the Brazilian geoglyphs. As of now, over 450 massive geoglyphs have been documented in the western Amazon, mostly in the state of Acre near the Bolivian border. But experts estimate there could be thousands more still hidden beneath the jungle's thick green cloak. From above, they look like giant crop circles, perfect geometric forms, circles, squares, octagons, and straight-line causeways, some stretching over 300 feet across. Many are interconnected by what appear to be ceremonial roads or boundaries, and they were dug into the earth, carved into the clay soil of the highlands. And here's what really makes your eyebrows rise. They're over 2,000 years old. For a long time, conventional wisdom said the Amazon was too poor in nutrients, too wild, too unforgiving to support complex human societies. Small tribes, yes. Hunter-gatherers, yes. But not civilizations. Not the kind that builds roads and cities and carves massive ceremonial structures into the landscape. But these geoglyphs say otherwise. You stand now at ground level inside one of the circular enclosures. The ditch is broad, 10 feet wide, 10 feet deep. The raised earth banks on either side are flattened almost as if they once supported wooden palisades or platforms. There's no stone here, just clay dug and shaped by human hands, using tools likely made of wood and bone. And it's everywhere. Archaeologists date the earliest of these structures to around 1000 BCE, and the most recent to just before the arrival of the Spanish in the 1500s. That's over 2 millennia of continuous human activity. And they weren't just building ditches. They were building networks. Geoglyph sites often appear in clusters spaced evenly, connected by causeways that stretch in dead straight lines for miles. This suggests central planning a shared cultural or religious purpose. Some believe they were used for ceremonial gatherings, ritual dances, astronomical alignments, or even political assemblies. There's no writing, no stone temples, but the pattern speaks loud and clear. This was not a wilderness. This was a home. And the soil, that's another shock. Near many geoglyph sites, archaeologists have found patches of terra preta, literally black earth. It's a dark, fertile soil created by humans filled with charcoal, broken pottery, fish bones, and organic material. Unlike the nutrient-poor jungle soil around it, terra preta regenerates. It's a kind of prehistoric supercompost, and it allowed people to farm here sustainably for generations. Historians still debate how the geoglyphs were used. Some think they were territorial markers dividing land among groups. Others believe they were sacred spaces where communities gathered to honor deities or ancestors. There's even evidence that certain geoglyphs align with solstices and equinoxes, suggesting astronomical observation. But what they definitely are is evidence of a lost Amazonian civilization. And this isn't just one pocket of people. Recent LiDAR scans using lasers to map the ground beneath the trees have revealed entire city grids, fortifications, and road systems hidden in the rainforest. In places like the Upper Xingu, there are signs of engineered landscapes where rivers were redirected and forests were managed like orchards. So what happened? Why didn't European explorers find cities when they arrived? The answer may be more tragic than mysterious disease. Smallpox, measles, and other European illnesses spread ahead of colonists, decimating populations before contact ever occurred. It's estimated that up to 90% of the Amazon's pre-Columbian population died within decades of first exposure. Entire cultures disappeared, villages collapsed, oral histories were lost, and the jungle it moved in. Nature reclaimed the roads, the gardens, the ceremonial plazas. Trees grew over the geoglyphs. Vines swallowed the trails. And for hundreds of years, the forest appeared untouched, until we started cutting it down and realized the past was still there. You step back from the ditch wall, brushing your hand along the packed clay. It's smooth, as if worked carefully by generations of hands. This wasn't a haphazard trench. It was crafted, and the mystery deepens. Some locals have long told stories of the old ones, people who came before, who knew the forest like an old friend and shaped the land with respect. Maybe these geoglyphs are part of that memory. Maybe they're not ruins in the traditional sense, but reminders that civilizations can be green, that complexity doesn't need stone, that silence can hold secrets for a very long time. And that's the big twist here. We think of lost civilizations as building up towers, ziggurats, pyramids, but the builders of the Amazon carved down. They shaped the land itself, dug into the soil, embedded their presence in the body of the earth, not to dominate it, but to harmonize with it. Their legacy wasn't erased, it was absorbed. You walk along the top of a geoglyphs embankment, the jungle pressing close a wall of green. Somewhere nearby, parrots scream and monkeys chatter. But beneath your feet, you feel the shape of something older, a circle, a causeway, a culture, not primitive, not vanished, just waiting to be seen. Now, you're drifting over the Baltic Sea, where the water is dark cold and stubbornly deep. This isn't a place where mysteries usually float to the surface. The sea here swallows secrets. But in 2011, a team of Swedish treasure hunters searching for shipwrecks stumbled across something no one expected, something that didn't belong. It was round, massive, and oddly symmetrical. Meet the Baltic Sea anomaly, an underwater structure that has sparked more confusion than clarity. Sitting about 300 feet below the surface, it's approximately 200 feet in diameter, resting on what appears to be a raised platform or pillar. And while sonar scans can be misleading, this thing didn't look like a random rock formation. It looked like a crashed spaceship, or at least that's how it was described in headlines around the world. You're probably picturing the Millennium Falcon, and you wouldn't be far off. From above, the object does seem to have a disc shape with lines and angles that suggest artificiality, a long, smooth depression across its surface, and even a structure that looks suspiciously like a stairway leading to a dark entry hole. The group that discovered it, Ocean X, released sonar images that set the internet on fire. Ancient aliens submerged bunkers, secret Nazi tech. The theories came fast and loud, but the truth, that's harder to find. You're now aboard a research vessel, floating above the coordinates in the Gulf of Bothnia, between Sweden and Finland. The water here is murky, the temperature low, visibility worse. A diver descends into the depths, slowly disappearing into the green-black void. Down there, they see it. Not just the main structure, but paths leading to it, lines carved into the seabed like it slid into place from a great distance. And nearby, a second smaller structure, almost like a broken-off piece. When the dive team brought back samples, more questions piled up. The material appeared to be stone, but with unusually high levels of metallic minerals. Some parts were scorched, burned, as if exposed to intense heat despite the freezing water. And some of the walls of the object were composed of volcanic rock, which doesn't naturally occur in the Baltic region. How does volcanic stone end up on the seafloor of a non-volcanic zone? Good question. Geologists have offered explanations. Some say the structure is a glacial deposit rocks and debris pushed into strange formations by the last ice age. Others believe it could be a natural sandstone feature eroded over time to resemble a disk. But here's where it gets weird again. The object seems to interfere with electronics. Multiple dives have reported that sonar cameras and even satellite phones start malfunctioning when they get close. Instruments flicker. Compasses spin. Machines die and mysteriously reboot once the boat moves away. That's not typical glacial moraine behavior. And the the right angles, the symmetrical features, not easily explained by erosion. Historians still debate whether the Baltic Sea anomaly is a purely geological feature or an ancient man-made structure, possibly a Stone Age temple that was submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. Others have compared it to megalithic constructions found in Turkey and Malta, suggesting a lost maritime culture with building techniques we've forgotten. And then, of course, there are the extraterrestrial theories that it's a UFO crash site, that it's a submerged surveillance post, that the damage to its structure was caused by atmospheric entry or underwater impact, that it still functions, somehow explaining the electronic disturbances. But these are just theories, no conclusive scans, no salvage, just sonar, just shadows. And yet, the shape remains. You examine one of the sonar images again. The edges are too clean. The central depression too symmetrical. The site looks engineered, not random, not accidental. Like someone or something put it there on purpose. The crew aboard the research vessel isn't celebrating. They're frustrated. Funding has dried up. Access to the site is difficult and expensive. Public interest has waned as attention moved to newer, shinier mysteries. But the anomaly is still there under hundreds of feet of water, unmoved and unsolved. You try to imagine the world that might have existed here before the sea swallowed it. Was this land once dry and green? Did people build something here, a temple, a fortress, a landing site, and then the ocean rose? The ice melted, the land drowned. And all that remained was this strange round scar on the seafloor. Or maybe none of that happened. Maybe the object is a natural formation with uncanny symmetry. Maybe our brains are just too hungry for pattern, too desperate for meaning. Maybe it's just a rock, but even if it is, why does it mess with electronics? Why does it look so much like something built? Why does it sit alone in the middle of nowhere, as if it fell from a great height or rose from below? You look out over the water. The sun glints off the ripples. It's calm today. Nothing to see here, just sea and sky. And 300 feet below, a mystery waits in silence. Whether it's nature playing tricks, or a relic from a time before memory, or a message from beyond the stars, it's there, unexplained, unmoved, undecoded. A circle in the dark, a question beneath the waves, and it's not going anywhere. Now, you're in Wisconsin, near the shores of a quiet lake that barely shows up on most maps. The water is dark, disturbed only by the occasional ripple of a fish or the lazy glide of a canoe. But beneath the surface, far below, where the sun reaches, there's something that doesn't belong, something ancient, something submerged, something shaped. This is Rock Lake, and according to local legend and now mounting evidence, it may be hiding a pair of underwater pyramids. You slide into a wetsuit, lower your diving mask, and descend beneath the chilly surface. Visibility is poor. The lake's murky water reduces your world to just a few feet in every direction. But then, as your flashlight sweeps across the lake bed, you see it. A shape, angular, deliberate. The structure is made of large, flat stones stacked into a formation that resembles a step pyramid, like the kind you'd expect to find in Central America, not the American Midwest. Locals have long referred to it as Limnati's Pyramid, one of several claimed to exist in the lake. The story of the Rock Lake Pyramids goes back to the early 1900s, when droughts caused the water levels to drop unusually low. A few residents claimed they could see the tops of stone structures rising just beneath the surface. Others spoke of canoes scraping against hard corners underwater. Some said they saw buildings, full-on temples flooded but intact. But those were just stories. Until divers began going down. In the 1930s, and again in the 1960s, scuba teams reported finding stone structures, some with perfect 90-degree angles and even flat walkways. More recent sonar scans have confirmed rectilinear anomalies at the lake's bottom, including shapes that seem too geometric to be natural formations. So what are they? One theory ties Rock Lake to the nearby archaeological site of Aztlan, located just 10 miles away. Aztlan was a Mississippian culture city, complete with earthen mounds, stockades, and ceremonial platforms active around 1000 to 1300 CE. The people of Aztlan built impressive structures mostly out of dirt and timber, but some believe they may have also constructed stone ceremonial sites. Could Rock Lake have once been a dry valley home to ceremonial platforms or sacred mounds before rising water levels buried the evidence? Or were the pyramids here long before Aztlan? Some claim the structures are thousands of years older remnants of a lost North American civilization that built in stone and vanished without a trace, leaving only these water-covered ruins behind. There's even speculation that they might predate the last ice age, built during a time when the climate was warmer and sea levels lower. And yes, some whisper about Atlantis, because of course they do. But unlike so many lost continent theories, Rock Lake offers tangible evidence. Divers have brought back photos, grainy, blurry, but intriguing. Sonar scans show right angles, terrace-like formations, and what appear to be man-made platforms beneath the sediment. One structure, the so-called Pyramid B Amir, measures around 30 feet across at its base, with a step design rising to a point. And then there are the petroglyphs. On some of the stones, divers have reported carvings, simple geometric patterns, and symbols that resemble Mesoamerican glyphs, though this claim is hotly disputed. Some dismiss the markings as natural erosion. Others see them as the final clue that this site was once above ground, part of a culture that communicated through symbols long before European contact. Historians still debate whether these underwater forms are simply glacial erratics, large stones left behind by melting ice sheets, or genuine remnants of prehistoric engineering. Geologists argue that the region was heavily shaped by glacial activity, and that stone stacks could form naturally. But those who've been down there, they say otherwise. Divers describe how the rocks are aligned, leveled, and in some cases even mortared, though this remains unverified by lab analysis. One diver in the 1990s claimed to see what looked like doorways now collapsed and passages choked with silt. Another reported hearing a low-frequency hum while swimming near one of the pyramid sites. There's no consensus, no official excavation. The murky waters make it nearly impossible to photograph or scan clearly. And without federal recognition, funding is scarce, and research remains mostly amateur. But the mystery continues to pull people in. You float now above the supposed location of one pyramid, letting the sun dapple the water's surface. You imagine what might lie beneath blocks, platforms, altars. A civilization that watched the stars from this very spot, built something to mirror the heavens, then vanished as the lake slowly rose, year after year, until everything was gone. No writings, no myths, just stone and water. Rock Lake isn't famous. It's not on most ancient wonders lists. It's just a quiet place with a few local legends and some very persistent divers who swear there's more down there than fish. But maybe that's what makes it matter. Because not all lost civilizations were vast empires. Some were small, local, and fragile, vanished not through war, but through rising water and forgetting. And maybe that's the most human story of all. You climb back into the boat, dripping and chilled. Behind you, the lake laps gently at the shore, giving nothing away. But you know what you saw. Not ruins, not certainty, but possibility. Now, you're deep in the heart of the Amazon. But this time, you're not looking for ruins or pyramids. You're here for something even older, even more surprising. You scoop a handful of soil and let it crumble between your fingers. It's dark, almost black, soft, rich and fragrant in a way that no tropical dirt should be. You've just touched Amazonian dark earth. Or, as the locals call it, terra preta, literally black earth. And it's not supposed to exist here, because the Amazon's natural soil is notoriously poor. It's acidic, nutrient light and easily leached by rainfall. It can barely support agriculture, let alone civilization. And yet, this dark earth can. For a long time, scholars believed that the Amazon couldn't support large-scale human societies. The soil was too weak, the jungle too fierce. So any ancient people here must have been small tribes scattered and surviving, not thriving. But terra preta flips that script. It's human-made soil, anthropogenic, created thousands of years ago by unknown peoples who understood something modern scientists are only just beginning to grasp. They enrich the land using a method so sophisticated it's still not fully understood. You kneel beside a trench, cut by archaeologists, where the layers of soil are exposed like pages in a book. At the bottom, regular Amazonian clay, pale, infertile. Above that, several feet of jet black soil mixed with charcoal pottery shards, bone fragments, plant matter, and ash. Not just a dumping ground, a recipe. The charcoal, often called biochar, is the key. When plant material is burned at low temperatures with little oxygen, it becomes stable and porous. When mixed into soil, it improves nutrient retention, fosters microbial activity, and holds moisture like a sponge. But here's the kicker: terra preta regenerates. It grows over time, becoming more fertile, more alive. Some of these deposits are thousands of years old, and they're still better than modern farmland. Farmers today, in fact, often dig up terra preta and sell it bagged and branded to gardeners and growers. So who made this miracle soil, and why? Historians still debate the exact identity of the people behind terra preta. It wasn't just one group, but many. A culture or cultures that lived in the Amazon long before European contact, maybe as far back as 450 BCE or earlier. These were people who didn't just survive in the jungle, they shaped it, and not just the soil. LiDAR scans and archaeological digs have revealed massive road networks, settlement grids, and water management systems hidden beneath the trees. Raised causeways, canals, artificial mounds. In some places, the very layout of the forest itself seems manipulated, planted with useful trees, like Brazil, nut cacao, and ecai. The Amazon, it turns out, may be less a wilderness and more a garden, designed, curated, and cultivated by human hands over thousands of years. The implications are staggering, because it means that ancient Amazonian civilizations were larger, smarter, and more ecologically advanced than anyone thought. They didn't conquer nature. They partnered with it, and then they vanished. Or rather, they were erased. European diseases swept through the rainforest ahead of colonial expansion, killing an estimated 90% of the indigenous population. Villages were abandoned. Oral traditions faded. Forests regrew over fields and gardens. And within a few generations, the Amazon became untouched again. But the soil remembered. You scoop another handful of terra preta and wonder, how did these people figure it out? How did they discover a method of soil enrichment so effective it's now studied as a solution to modern climate change? Because that's another twist. Biochar doesn't just help crops grow. It also sequesters carbon, locking it in the ground for centuries. In an era of global warming, this ancient Amazonian technology may hold clues for restoring degraded soils, reducing emissions, and feeding billions sustainably. Imagine that. A solution to the future, hidden in the past. And yet for centuries, this dark earth was ignored. Early explorers noted it but didn't understand. Farmers dug it up without asking how it got there. Archaeologists focused on pyramids and palaces, not compost pits. But now, the tide is turning. Terra preta is recognized as one of the clearest signs that the Amazon was once home to dense, complex societies with populations possibly in the millions. Cities that left no stone temples, but left behind better soil. And maybe that's more impressive, because monuments crumble, statues fall, but soil feeds the future. You stand in a clearing where terra preta runs thick beneath your boots. The air hums with insects. Parrots shriek from the canopy. Somewhere nearby, a farmer plants cassava, not in modern fertilizer, but in this ancient black earth. He doesn't need to understand the chemistry. He just knows it works. And that's the quiet genius of it all. The creators of terra preta didn't build to be remembered. They didn't etch their names in stone. They didn't shout across the centuries. They just made the ground better, greener, deeper. And now, thousands of years later, we're finally listening. Because sometimes the greatest civilizations aren't the loudest. They're the ones who learn to live with the land, to build not over nature, but into it. And when they disappear, they leave behind not ruins, but life. You're back in Egypt now, but not under the towering pyramids of Giza or the colossal temples of Karnak. This time, you're in a dusty museum corridor, standing in front of a small, unassuming object, perched behind a smudged glass case. It doesn't glow. It doesn't impress. But it stops you in your tracks just the same. A wooden bird with wings and a tail shaped like a rudder. This is the Sakura bird, and it might be the oldest airplane in the world, or just a very clever toy. You lean closer. The object is about 7 inches long, carved from sycamore wood, and dated to around 200 BCE, found in the necropolis of Saqqara in 1898. At first glance, it looks like a falcon, a sacred bird in ancient Egyptian mythology. The falcon was associated with Horus, the sky god, often depicted with outstretched wings and the eye that sees everything. But this bird, it's different. It has no feet. Its tail is vertical, like a modern plane's rudder. Its wings are straight, not flared like a real bird's. And the fuselage is, well, almost aerodynamic. Engineers, hobbyists, and fringe historians have studied it for decades. Some see a model glider. Others see a ritual object. Some say it's evidence that the Egyptians had a basic understanding of aerodynamics long before the Wright brothers ever put wood to air. In the 1970s, an aerodynamics expert named Dr. Khalil Messiha recreated the Saqqara bird. At a larger scale, added a stabilizing tailplane that was possibly broken off from the original and flew it. It glided smoothly like a paper airplane guided by ancient intuition. So, what are we looking at here? Is it a toy? A weather vane, a ritualistic symbol of flight and rebirth, or a scaled-down prototype for something we've long since lost. Historians still debate its purpose. The conservative interpretation is that the Saqqara bird is a ceremonial object, perhaps a symbolic representation of the soul's flight into the afterlife. In Egyptian mythology, the soul, the Bo, was often depicted as a bird flying from the tomb. Maybe this little falcon was meant to help the deceased navigate the skies of the next world, but that tail, that rudder, that vertical stabilizer, those aren't common in ritual bird statues. And what about the balance? Tests show the Saqqara bird has near-perfect center of mass alignment, a key component in actual aircraft design. Its wings are slightly swept and shaped in a way that suggests someone knew a little about lift, coincidence, or something more. Here's where it gets even more curious. Ancient Egyptian texts include references to flight, although not always in literal terms. The Book of the Dead talks about ascending to the sky, riding on the winds, sailing in the air. Symbolic, probably. But what if they weren't just dreaming? Some fringe researchers propose that the Saqqara bird was part of a larger tradition of forgotten technologies. Machines lost in time, swept away in floods, fires, or political upheaval. They imagine workshops along the Nile, where priests and craftspeople tested designs, observed birds, studied balance, and maybe built something that actually flew. No engines, no fuel, just gliders launched from temple roofs or cliffs. Flight not like a jetliner, but like a hawk catching thermals. Quiet, graceful, possible, skeptical? Sure, you should be. There's no written record of flight from ancient Egypt. No scrolls describing blueprints. No carvings of wings attached to men. And the Saqqara bird remains one of a kind. No other artifacts like it have been found in situ. But isn't that how all mysteries start? With just one oddity, one object that doesn't quite fit. You turn the bird gently in your hands. Okay, in your imagination. The museum wouldn't like you manhandling their 2,000-year-old puzzle. The wood is dry and worn, the edges smoothed by centuries. It's delicate, but deliberate. Someone carved this with care. It wasn't tossed off like a doodle in wood. It was crafted with balance, with shape, with intention. And that more than anything suggests meaning. Whether that meaning was spiritual or experimental, we may never know. But consider, this ancient people watched birds constantly. They lived close to nature. They observed the skies with a kind of intimacy we've long since traded for screen time. If you lived your life beside falcons and ibis and vultures, wouldn't you wonder what it felt like to fly? Wouldn't you try? You step out of the museum into the Saqqara sun. In the distance, the step pyramid of Djoser rises from the sands, its terraces catching the light like the feathers of a stone bird frozen mid-flap. You picture someone 2,200 years ago climbing a rooftop with this little wooden object in hand. They wait for a breeze, then toss it, and for one glorious second, it flies. Just a simple glide. But in that moment, the sky feels closer. And maybe that's all it was. Not a machine, not a prototype, just a dream carved from sycamore. A wish for flight. A whisper of what could be. Because in the end, even if it didn't change the world, it changed someone's world. And maybe that's enough. Now you're standing at the edge of the Aegean Sea, on a rocky shoreline in southern Greece. The water laps at your boots. It's clear and impossibly blue. You can see the seabed rippled with sand, dotted with seaweed and something else. Lines, walls, streets. You're looking at Pavlopetri, the oldest known underwater city in the world. And no, that's not a dramatic exaggeration. This isn't myth. This isn't Atlantis. It's real, a city built over 5,000 years ago, now resting beneath 12 feet of water off the coast of Laconia. Discovered in 1967 and mapped in detail in the 2000s using advanced sonar and 3D modeling, Pavlopetri is more than just a pile of submerged stones. It's a fully laid out town, roads, courtyards, tombs, dwellings, and even plumbing. You dive in. The water is warm, the sunlight slicing down in golden shafts, and as you swim past the remnants of this Bronze Age metropolis, it hits you. They lived here, right here, families, merchants, sailors, farmers. They woke up, cooked meals, raised children, mourned their dead. You can still trace their footsteps in the patterns of the stone foundations. The roads are wide enough for carts. The buildings are arranged with order and thought. Some homes even have multiple rooms, separate entryways, and storage areas. This wasn't a haphazard fishing village. It was planned. Experts estimate the city was originally built around 2800 BCE and flourished during the Minoan and Mycenaean periods, contemporaries of Egypt's Old Kingdom and the early Indus Valley civilization. That makes it older than classical Greece by almost 2,000 years, and it raises a question. Why don't we talk about this more? Historians still debate whether Pavlopetri was a major trade hub or simply a coastal settlement swept into the sea by an earthquake or tsunami around 1000 BCE. Whatever its status, it represents something we rarely get to see, an intact Bronze Age city, untouched by later construction, buried by water rather than time, which is why it's so incredibly well preserved. Unlike cities lost to jungle or sand, Pavlopetri wasn't looted, burned, or built over. It just slipped beneath the waves, and then it waited. Some of the artifacts found here include pottery tools and stone weights, suggesting the residents were heavily involved in trade, possibly exchanging goods with Crete, Egypt, and the broader Mediterranean world. You can almost picture the ship's short, wide vessels with curved prows pulling into Pavlopetri's harbor, unloading amphorae of oil and wine, and the ceramics, decorated with spirals, waves, and marine motifs, like echoes of the sea that eventually reclaimed the city. The layout of the town also tells a story. It wasn't just a cluster of houses, it had avenues, gridded blocks, and community buildings. Some archaeologists even speculate there may have been a civic center, perhaps used for gatherings or religious purposes. And the graves there are dozens placed with intention, marked by stone slabs or positioned within the urban plan. There's a logic here, a rhythm, a sense that whoever built Pavlopetri knew how to build a city, which is especially strange when you remember the time frame, because we often think of urban planning as a product of Empire, Babylon, Rome, Beijing. But Pavlopetri predates those cities by over a millennium. It predates written Greek. It predates Homer. So how did this level of organization happen? Did ideas spread from Mesopotamia, or was this an independent development? Did the knowledge of city building emerge spontaneously in coastal Greece, fostered by trade and proximity to other cultures? Or is this the last visible remnant of something even older, something we've forgotten? You swim into what remains of a main street. The stones are uneven, but placed with intent. The homes on either side are modest by modern standards, but cozy. You can imagine the sound of sandals on limestone, children chasing one another, smoke curling from clay hearths, and then silence. Something happened. No one knows exactly what. Earthquake, tsunami. A slow rise in sea level. The sea crept in, the land gave way, and Pavlopetri became an Atlantis of its own. Without the myth, without the legend, just real people and real homes buried beneath the waves. And there it stayed unnoticed for thousands of years. Until a diver in the 20th century happened to look down at the right angle. Since then, Pavlopetri has become a model for underwater archaeology. Using side scan, sonar photogrammetry, and digital modeling, researchers have recreated the city, virtually allowing anyone to walk through its streets without getting wet. But even in pixels, it feels haunting, because it was abandoned, yes, but not destroyed, which somehow makes it feel more alive. Some scholars believe Pavlopetri may have inspired later Greek myths about lost cities. Others think it was just one of many coastal towns swallowed by the Mediterranean, their histories erased by time and tide. Sea levels have risen dramatically since the Bronze Age. What else is out there, still hiding beneath the blue? You surface gasping slightly. The shoreline seems closer now. The waves quieter. Pavlopetri doesn't give up many secrets. No great texts. No inscriptions. Just layout. Form. Design. But maybe that's enough. Because even without words it speaks. It says we were here. We planned. We built. We lived. And in a world obsessed with what was written down, it's easy to forget that most human stories were never recorded. They were lived in houses, on roads, along shorelines. And sometimes those stories get washed away, but not erased. You look back at the water where the sun dances over the waves and think, beneath the surface, the city waits. Not for discovery, but for recognition. Now, you're in the dense eucalyptus bush of New South Wales, Australia, under a sky full of gum branches and bird calls. The air smells of dust and sun-warmed bark. You're following a rough footpath through wild terrain when you stop. Ahead, carved into a weathered sandstone cliff, is something that doesn't quite make sense. This is no Aboriginal Dreamtime painting. These are hieroglyphs, Egyptian ones. Welcome to the mystery of the Gosford Glyphs, tucked away near Kariong, a coastal town about an hour north of Sydney. The Gosford Glyphs are a collection of over 300 symbols etched into 2 stone walls deep in the forest. If they're authentic, they would represent one of the greatest archaeological upheavals of all time. Because these glyphs don't just resemble ancient Egyptian writing, they appear to be actual Egyptian hieroglyphs, arranged in phrases that, when translated by amateur researchers, tell the story of Egyptian sailors arriving in Australia over 4,000 years ago. You read that right. The story carved into the rock supposedly tells of an expedition led by a son of Pharaoh Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, who was blown off course during a voyage and stranded in a foreign southern land. According to the translation, one of the crew died from a snake bite. Another passage laments that the journey was cursed, and yet another seems to describe an attempt to worship the gods in this strange new world. It's a story of lost fear and reverence, but the question is it real? You step closer to the stone wall. The symbols are deeply cut, weathered in places but clear. There are cartouches, birds, serpents, even what might be a scarab. And they're not random. Many follow standard Middle Egyptian syntax, at least on the surface. But then come the problems. Mainstream Egyptologists are skeptical, to say the least. The glyphs, they argue, contain errors, symbol combinations that don't match accepted grammar references to deities or phrases from different time periods, and some that look suspiciously like copies from 20th century textbooks, not 4,000-year-old inscriptions. Most scholars consider the Gosford glyphs to be a modern hoax, likely carved in the 1920s or 1930s by someone with access to early Egyptology materials. Some say it was a prank. Others believe it may have been a romantic tribute, perhaps a World War I veteran fascinated by ancient cultures, leaving behind his own story on stone. And yet, no one has ever been caught carving them, and the weathering on some glyphs does appear older than 100 years. A few geologists who've studied the site argue that parts of the inscription could be centuries old, if not more. Local Aboriginal elders also have mixed feelings. Some believe the site is sacred, tied not to Egyptian sailors, but to their own ancient stories. Others dismiss the glyphs entirely. And still others suggest that maybe, just maybe, the carvings are a record of cultural contact, that they represent a blending or a borrowing or a whisper of something older. Because here's what complicates the skepticism: there are similarities. Aboriginal oral traditions in parts of Australia tell of bearded visitors from the west of sky gods, arriving by boat of foreigners who died in the bush and were buried with ceremony. Egyptian myths, in turn, speak of lands of the setting sun, far to the south across waters where the dead might journey. Coincidence maybe, but enough to keep the mystery alive. You turn now and follow a trail to a small flat rock separate from the main glyph panels. On it, a few symbols have been carved: a bird, a sun, a half circle. One researcher suggests this might be a burial marker. According to the supposed translation, the Egyptian crew buried one of their own nearby, erecting a stone to honor his spirit. No body has ever been found, no artifacts, just the glyphs and the wind. But still they pull people here, not because they've been authenticated, but because they exist, and because they challenge what we think we know about contact exploration and human curiosity. Historians still debate whether the Gosford glyphs are a fraud, a spiritual artwork, or a rogue truth lost in academic dust. But one thing's for sure: someone carved them. Someone walked into this remote part of the Australian bush years ago and carefully etched hundreds of symbols into stone, not for fame, not for wealth, but for meaning. You imagine that person now, kneeling beside the wall, sandstone under their fingers, carving by lamplight or sun, one symbol at a time. Maybe they believed the story. Maybe they were telling it for someone else. Or maybe they were just keeping a secret alive. And that's the heart of the Gosford glyphs. Not proof, not fiction, but a quiet question. What if someone did come here? What if contact happened not once, but many times? What if the world was less disconnected than we thought? We like our history neat, contained, written in books, and labeled in museums. But sometimes it leaks through the cracks into cave walls, forgotten stones, and carvings made in silence. You run your hand over the final line of glyphs. The stone is warm from the sun. The symbols are faded but firm, and they say in whatever language you read them in, we were here. We journeyed far. We left a mark. Maybe that's enough. You lie back now, the journey complete. 50 ancient mysteries have whispered their truths, or withheld them, each one stranger than the last. You've drifted from ice-covered lakes to jungle-covered pyramids, from buried cities to windswept deserts, from underwater anomalies to forgotten stone birds carved to defy time. And the world feels different now, doesn't it? Because you've seen the seams, the cracks in the grand story we were told in school. You've heard from voices who didn't write books but shaped stone. You've walked alongside civilizations whose names have been lost, whose ruins lie underwater or under suspicion, who might have known more or something else entirely than we give them credit for. Some of it was grounded in science. Some of it still waits for answers. And some of it, well, maybe it never wanted to be solved in the first place. That's okay. Not every mystery demands a solution. Some are here to remind you that wonder is still alive, that the past is not a closed door, but a passage still creaking open. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the glow of the screen begins to fade, let yourself fall backward, not just into sleep, but into the long, strange, beautiful history of everything we don't know. Because it's there just beneath the surface, waiting, listening, calling out across the centuries and symbols in stone, in silence. And you lucky wanderer, you've heard it. Good night.